everyone, and welcome to True North Live. It is my great pleasure to be joining you tonight. I'm your host tonight, Candice Malcolm, and we're here for the Conservative Party of Canada leadership debate. I'm very pleased to be joined by two of my colleagues here. First, Harley Sims, who is an editor and senior reporter here at True North. He's based out of somewhere around Vancouver, I think one of the suburbs in Vancouver. Harley, great to have you. Great to see you. And also we have Harrison Faulkner, who is a producer on the Candice Malcolm Show and also a reporter. Harrison, great to see you as well.
Great to see you both.
So here we are at the second debate in 2 weeks, and for me, I moderated the last one, so I have a newfound sort of respect for the entire sort of operation of putting one of these events together, and the sort of nerves that you feel before the event starts, not just for the candidates, but for everyone who's organizing it and the moderator. Tonight's event out in Edmonton, Alberta, is moderated by Tom Clark, who is a former Legacy Media reporter, journalist who was with Global News for a long time, and I think now he is a consultant. So a little bit of a strange pick, given that this is the only debate in Western Canada. It's the debate in Alberta, and they didn't have a Albertan or a Westerner to to moderate it. And interesting because that we have 5 candidates in this race, and they're all from Ontario or Quebec. They all represent Ontario, Quebec. I know Pierre Poilievre was born in Calgary, raised in Calgary, and I'm sure he'll mention that many times tonight. But I'll go to you first, Harley. What are you expecting? What are you excited about? And what do you think is going to happen tonight?
Well, all things at stake, Candice. I'm not ashamed to say I'm looking for an entertaining debate. I don't think a lot of people, other than political junkies, watch these things expecting to be entertained. But I mean, the last one was pretty fiery, and I don't think it's right to say this is a normal debate. I mean, there are a lot of things that these candidates will be putting forward tonight that will shape the direction of our country going into the next election. I'm looking for just an honest recognition of the issues that are facing Canadians, rather than just the usual politics. And I think those issues include the economy, namely affordability, and on civil liberties. I mean, we are over $1 trillion in debt. Gas here in BC hit $2.20 a liter. Our housing has become unaffordable for the next generation. And beyond that, we just went through 2 years of a pandemic that saw people's businesses shut down, people denied entry to certain places, people still unable to leave the country due to vaccination status, peaceful protesters who were arrested and had their bank accounts and their vehicles seized. I mean, we're in a crisis right now. I don't think there's any way around that. So I'm looking forward to seeing which candidates take that head on and which ones want to just pretend it's business as usual.
Well, it's interesting because at the last debate in Ottawa, I think one of the rowdiest moments of the whole debate was exchange between Pierre Poilievre and Jean Charest. And I was really surprised because Jean Charest just took a direct shot at the trucker convoy. And, you're in a room full of 800, 900 people. Sure, you're in Ottawa, and that's sort of the establishment capital of Canada, the fake news capital of Canada. We called it on my show last week. But the room gave him a resounding set of boos. Like it was loud and it was intense. And it was like that, that is one of the issues that even though the trucker convoy became controversial, even though there was a lot of stuff that happened that I think a lot of people don't agree with, the sort of lawlessness and some of the more extreme characters that the media focused on. Of course, that wasn't the broad sentiment. But there was one thing it seemed that the Conservative base was really behind, and that was that these truckers were doing something righteous, they were doing something good, and that they deserve respect and attention, empathy, all of the things that Justin Trudeau should have done. We've been talking a lot about it. Harrison, you were at the trucker convoy. Do you think that's going to be a sort of main theme of the debate tonight, or do you expect them to talk about something a little different?
I think the moderators are probably going to do their best, or the moderator is going to do his best to avoid making it all about the convoy. But it's really I think that's really where all of the big ticket, big sort of red meat items at the base want to hear. That's kind of where it all comes from. A lot of the civil liberties discussion will stem from the convoy protest. And I think that it was a total flashpoint in the country and really emblematic of where we find ourselves. Like Harley, I think the last thing I want to see tonight is a boring debate. We have 2 hours. They have to fill 2 hours, which is not easy. It's going to be a long debate, but it'll make it a lot better if they really go after each other, really carve out a space for themselves. And I've written down some notes about what I'm expecting to see, and I know we'll get into this before the debate starts. But yeah, I hope it's not. I hope it's not totally dominated by the convoy itself. I think there was a lot of opportunity for the candidates to make their pitch on that issue in the last debate. I think what we're going to see is a lot of resource related debate, a lot of conversation on who has a better track record when it comes to supporting natural resources and supporting the oil and gas sector. And of course, I think the big takeaway will be how Patrick Brown performs, how he receives a lot of the heat that I'm sure he's going to get from the candidates, and how he dishes it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will be the third one to echo that. I hope it's an entertaining debate. 2 hours is a really long time to fill, but we do have a new campaigner, debater that will be on the stage, and that is Patrick Brown. He was absent from the last debate. He seems to be laying pretty low. His strategy is sort of to not really do any interviews, not really have any presence, and kind of maybe hope to slide through without scrutiny. And should be interesting. Just to, a lot of people getting their first glimpse of him tonight. I want to talk a little bit about the legacy media and how they respond to things, because what I noticed in the coverage and the feedback from the first debate was that a lot of media, a lot of journalists that were commenting were not very happy with the tone. They call it angry and bitter, and even my friend over at the Toronto Sun, Brian Lilly, he didn't like the tone of the debate and he thought it was unbecoming. To me, this moment in the country, and I'll sort of circle back to what you said off the start, Harley. Our country has gone through something really incredible in the last 2 years, and there are a lot of people out there that are feeling just completely angry, completely disaffected, outside, left behind. I mean, there's so many words to describe it, and I think you want your politicians to reflect that. I think that a lot of the anger wasn't coming because Pierre Poilievre and Jean Charest and Roman Baber, thank goodness that he's part of this debate, because he's raising so many of these important issues. They're not bitter and angry people. They're actually, each of them in their own way, quite positive and optimistic. But the reason that I think that the tone of the debate was so aggressive is because they're tapping into the anger and resentment and the sort of growing divides that are very evident under the surface in our society. We're basically just lived through 2 years where almost every institution that we rely on has failed us in some way, shape, or form. So, Harley, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I don't know what place civility has right now, nonviolence for certainly, but Justin Trudeau was the first person to throw civility out the window. I mean, the September 2021 election, he started using hate to wedge people. He used the unvaccinated issue as a way of gaining votes and demonizing Canadians. Before that, if you actually heard him talk about mandating vaccines, he said he was concerned. He didn't want to create divisions. He knew there were people who weren't going to take it. But the election came along, and obviously he thought he had an edge by speaking about Canadians in a hateful way, and it was hateful. So now we need a leader, a conservative leader, who are willing to accept that Justin Trudeau is hateful towards a certain segment of his own population and come in aggressively. And I mean, it's not a matter of shaking hands anymore. The gauntlet has been thrown down. We have a prime minister who basically showed Canadians that protesting peacefully and talking isn't good, it doesn't work with him. I don't know what message that sends. But like I said, I think we need someone who's willing to show his fangs, come out and tell the Canadians that desperately want to see some opposition, what he's made of, and that he's not going to mince words come election time.
I think you're right. I think so many Canadians just want someone who can take on Trudeau, someone who won't be deferent to him in the way that the media are, and won't be too polite to him, because he doesn't, frankly, deserve our courtesy and our politeness, given the way that he's treated us. I want to bring in True North's Andrew Lawton. Andrew Lawton is on the ground at the debate in Edmonton. There's Andrew. Hey, Andrew, welcome to the live broadcast here. You're in Edmonton. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what is going on at the debate? Set the stage for us about the event over there.
Yeah, I will do. So right now I'm actually just outside of the foyer where they've had a nice little reception area. And as much as I love the cash bar in there, it was a little bit too noisy to dial into the broadcast from there. They're expecting about 800. Well, actually, I should say they have room for 800. They had about 1,000 people register. So I don't know if it's going to be standing room only, but a lot of enthusiasm here. People in Western Canada, especially in conservative politics, often feel like everything is very Eastern focused, Ontario centric. So they're very happy that the party is having this debate out in Edmonton. They're very happy to have the opportunity to hear from the candidates here. And when I was chatting with people, one of the big questions I was asking is, do you have a candidate in mind? Met a couple of people who were undecided, but every single person but one who was not undecided was saying they were here for Pierre Poilievre. And I don't share that because I'm endorsing Pierre. I share that just because when the debate starts, I think you can expect to see a home field advantage from Pierre Poilievre here, who was born in Alberta. And I was wondering if that would actually give him enough cred to be recognized as a Westerner. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, he's Albertan enough for them.
Well, I mean, it's true, and I think that a lot of people out west are just excited that Pierre has the momentum. He's got he's kind of has the ability to go viral online, and the fact that he is elected in Ontario kind of shows that he can be elected in multiple parts of the country. So I think he certainly has a lot going for going for him. Andrew, I wonder though, like the sort of heart and soul of the conservative movement, the Conservative Party has always been Alberta. And it was sort of strange that we didn't see any Alberta MPs throw their hat in and try to run for leader. Do you hear any grumbling about that? Is there any reason why we don't have any Alberta MPs trying to become leader of this party at this point?
It's a tough question. And I think that one of the big things that a lot of people are latching on to is whether they have Alberta-centric policies or policies that are friendly to Albertans and Alberta. And a big part of that comes down to energy, oil and gas, that sort of stuff. But it isn't exclusively that. And I think that's the big thing. There are a lot of challenges that people in Western Canada are raising about sovereignty, about independence on taxation and other government policies, about equalization. That's a big one. People that want a prime minister and a leader that's going to advocate for a renewed equalization formula. So there are other challenges that I hope will be raised tonight and that a lot of people here hope will be raised tonight. And to go back to the discussion you were having before you brought me in about what we can expect from the moderator, that's the big thing. A lot of the time, the legacy media folks don't care about the West or don't know about the West. We're talking about the conservative heartland here. We're talking about a debate in Alberta for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, a party that wouldn't even be in play if it weren't for Alberta and Saskatchewan seats. So there need to be questions about the West and its place in Canada that go beyond just pipelines.
Well, I certainly, I think that Tom Clark has his work cut out for him. I'm certainly cheering for him just in terms of, doing exactly that, being in touch with what conservatives care about, what issues are important in Western Canada, because there's certainly a big divide. We saw this a lot, both in 2019 and 2021, Andrew, where, the media would fixate on these really little, minute issues. And you'd have like 20 questions about critical race theory or systemic racism, and it's like that they don't talk about the issues that actually matter. And so I really hope I am cheering for Tom Clark, and I hope he does a good job. I'm sure he will. I want to ask you about Patrick Brown, because he's sort of making his first appearance. He doesn't do a lot of media. He doesn't do a lot of interviews. He didn't bother to show up to the Canada Strong and Free debate last week. He was the only one that didn't. And I'm wondering, does he have support out there? Have you had a chance to talk to him or any of his people? And what do you sort of expect him to bring? I think the pressure is on him to do something, and everyone's going to be watching him. So I'm wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah, I mean, all of the candidates, each of the candidates was given a table on which they could have volunteers and put up signs and give out pamphlets and that sort of stuff. And one of the interesting things that happened is all of these tables were full of volunteers handing it out, except Patrick Brown's. When I was last in the room about 15, 20 minutes ago, his table was empty and just had a little placard on it that the party had set there that said Patrick Brown. Now, maybe they've loaded it up since then, but at the time that I was in there, they weren't really interested in doing that politicking that all of the other candidates are doing. Now, I should say the one person I spoke to who is a decided voter that wasn't a Pierre Poilievre supporter was a Patrick Brown supporter. So he does have some support, if some is greater than zero in Alberta. But, he can surprise a lot of people because his strategy has been, don't worry about debates, don't worry about media, focus on selling membership, selling. And if you're a local candidate seeking the nomination in a riding like Brampton West or Abitibi-Témiscamingue. That's the strategy. You aren't going to get votes doing radio interviews and all candidates forums, but in a leadership contest, in a national contest, I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if you can win people over unless you're prepared to take the stage and answer questions. I mean, maybe the joke will be on all of us and he'll have outsold everyone, but that's going to be the big question is, at a certain point, you lose support by not being there. And I worry that was the case for him last. I mean, I know he said he won the debate last time by not being there. This one, the party requires them to be at. They get fined $50,000 if they're not there. So he's got to be here.
Oh, that was a pretty arrogant comment from my perspective, that you won by not showing up, because no one knows you. You haven't had an opportunity to show yourself. So I'm pleased. Hopefully he will be there. And Andrew, why don't you just quickly walk us through the evening, what we can expect? I know we're going to be streaming the debate live on this channel. So some people in the chat are wondering, where can I watch the debate? When does it start? Well, we're going to have it for you right here. Just keep watching. But Andrew, why don't you sort of walk us through what to expect, both during the debate and then afterwards as well?
Just to give you a little behind the scenes, I don't know if you saw it, but Jean Charest just walked by to walk in the debate hall. Roman Baber a few moments before him. So that means I'll have to be following quickly behind them. The candidates are going to be taking the stage in just 14 minutes. It is, as you mentioned, a 2-hour debate. Tom Clark is the moderator. We know some of the broad themes that are going to be there, but we don't know the questions. The candidates don't know the questions. And afterwards, there are going to be opportunities for the candidates to do what are called scrums, which are these post-debate press conferences that they do. And this is what, I participated in after the federal leaders debate in the last election. And I will say, at that debate, each candidate stood up and took 10 minutes of questions. Here, each candidate is doing 5 minutes of questions. So after the debate, there's going to be no more than 30 minutes of these scrums combined among all 6 candidates. So if you've got a candidate that is pretty long-winded, gives longer answers, they might only take 1 or 2 questions. Some that can do rapid-fire sound bites might burn through a whole bunch of them. But there are going to be lots of opportunities for the candidates to talk to each other on stage, a little bit less to talk to media off stage afterwards.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, Andrew, I know you have to go because the debate starts in 13 minutes. Just one final question for you, though. Obviously, independent media is a really important issue to us, and there is sort of this growing divide between legacy media and independent media. Are there other independent media there? Are there other journalists that are not part of legacy media, or what have you seen so far?
Yeah, I've seen Rebel News has a couple of people here. I've seen someone from the National Telegraph as well. I've seen some other reporters who I didn't have identification on them, so I didn't know which outlets they were from. They may have been mainstream media, or they could have been, the 27 people from CBC. But we do have a lot of media interest here. And I will say, I was talking to one legacy media reporter who was telling me about just streeters that she was doing earlier. And she found, similar to what I found, that Pierre Poilievre was really the only one that she could get anyone to say here that they were supporting. So, a lot of people would look at that and say, great, it's a runaway for Pierre. The problem is, this early in the race, if you're the one in the front, you're the one everyone wants to attack. So that'll be the interesting question. I mean, front runner syndrome is very real in politics. We saw that's what happened with Peter MacKay last time, and it may be what happens to Pierre Poilievre this time, but we will have to see.
Well, Andrew, appreciate your insight, and it's great to have you on the ground. We're looking forward to seeing you during the scrums, and hopefully you get some good questions into the candidates. So we will let you go so you can get positioned for the debate, which again is starting now in 11 minutes. So that's Andrew Lawton on the ground in Edmonton at the Conservative Party debate. Well, Harley, we've got Harrison Faulkner joining us again, and I don't think I mentioned it before, but Harrison, you're based in Toronto. And we were talking a little bit there, Harrison, about Patrick Brown and the fact that he's making his first appearance, the fact that Pierre Poilievre is sort of the front runner, and so expectations around him are really high. We did see in the last debate a lot of the candidates were going after him. We saw direct sort of challenges from Roman Baber on saying that the federal conservatives weren't there during COVID. They weren't standing up for Canadians. Leslyn Lewis claimed that he wasn't at the trucker convoy, that he was only pretending to be. And then, of course, Jean Charest had a number of attacks against him. So I'm wondering, what do you expect from both Pierre Poilievre and Patrick Brown specifically in this debate?
Well, I think that obviously Pierre Poilievre is going to try and do what he did the last time, which was continue to get as much attention as he can, go out swinging, obviously take his opportunity to swing at Patrick Brown and return some of the shots that Brown has been sending his way. I think what we're likely going to see from Patrick Brown is criticism of Pierre Poilievre on being softer on the Quebec 21 bill, Brown is probably going to go back into the call criticism into the what is it, the tip line from 2015. I mean, those are the kind of issues that he's relying on because of his strategy at appealing to diaspora politics, appealing to these immigrant communities. I don't think it's going to be I don't think it's going to be as policy focused. I imagine it's going to be just like a good fist fight that we saw the last debate.
Interesting. What are your thoughts, Harley?
Well, you don't hear many people talk about leadership candidates of a party at a gas station. And I've heard a lot of people talking about Pierre Poilievre everywhere I've gone. A lot of people, they don't even know his name, that Pierre guy, that they don't know how to pronounce his last name, but they're into it. So he's got the momentum. And I think it's up to the other candidates to distinguish themselves at this point. I mean, strange things can happen at leadership elections. People can come up the middle. You saw that with Aaron O'Toole. You saw it with Stéphane Dion with the Liberals. So, I mean, right now, I think Pierre just has to keep nailing his points home, keep saying the same thing that's gotten him all the attention. And I think it's really just a race between the people that recognize that Canada is in an unprecedented situation constitutionally, legally, and the people that, like Jean Charest, who are constantly accusing Poilievre of supporting illegal activities. So to me, it's just that it's two completely different streams, and it's interesting to see those two heads go at it.
I'm a little. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that one thing I'm also looking forward to seeing is how Roman Baber performs. I think that he surprised a lot of members in the debate last week. I know in the comments people are supporting Roman Baber, and I think that he has a really unique opportunity to. Obviously, he's one of the only candidates that has a different sort of perspective, comes from a different place from the provincial level, and he's got a very strong record on the issues that a lot of conservatives are looking to hear him speak on. And I thought he came out measured. He was very well spoken, and I do think he surprised a lot of people. I'm looking to see how he surprises members tonight.
I felt that too. Like, I know, just to echo what Andrew said earlier, that he's walking around trying to look for people to interview and asking who you're supporting. When I was in Ottawa at the last debate, almost everyone I talked to was a Pierre supporter. Like that was, they were interested in some of the other candidates and they thought so and so did a good job, bad job. But when people were willing to say who they supported, it was usually Pierre. However, I just felt the energy in the room and during the debate that it was Roman that was really hitting the applause lines, that was really getting people behind him. Like when he was talking, there was just a sort of organic agreement with him and people shouting out and people applauding him throughout the debate. So he is definitely onto something with the issues that he talks about. And it'll be interesting to see whether he can kind of drive on that momentum, because I do think that a lot of people just simply don't know him. He's not a federal politician. He's on the scene in Ontario, and even for us and for me personally, I had him on my show during the pandemic because he was sort of a lone fighter speaking out against some of the craziest policies and the harmful impact it was having on kids and schools and people at the margins and people who could suffer from falling through the cracks. Like he was really an advocate for those people at a time when there weren't very many, and I think a lot of people really admired him for that. I certainly did, especially leaving a conservative government, right? Like it's not like he had to go it alone. He took incredible risks, and I think that the fact that he's in this race, he adds so much just because he is so willing to talk about those issues. It's like, he doesn't really have a lot to lose, right? He's still trying to establish himself as a sort of federal figure, and he can really speak out in an honest way that you can't really when you're part of a caucus or when you're really the front runner, right? So I feel like Roman brings a lot of honesty and attention to some of the most important issues that I think many in our political elite class, and unfortunately that does include Pierre, would rather not talk about because it's uncomfortable to look in a mirror and say, you let this happen. You let kids suffer not going to school. You were responsible for churches closing and AA meetings shutting down and all of these people, falling again through the cracks. So I'm happy to see him here. Harley, I know this is sort of your beat and the thing that you cover the most with True North is civil liberties and all of the different ways that our country has failed us over the last 2 years. What did you think specifically about Roman Baber and his presence at the last debate?
I think you're right. I think he's in a privileged position where he can say exactly how he feels. I think he's a fast-running pace setter. I think he can set the stage. He was born in the former Soviet Union. We've had a few Canadians who supported the protests, the convoy protests from the former Soviet Union, including a police officer in Edmonton who said, people need to recognize what's happening because I see it. Roman Baber is one of them. I have friends who like him a great deal. I think he's doing really well. And you're right. Pierre Poilievre, Andrew Scheer pronounced it Poilievre, has been around a long time, close to 20 years. He's not a new face. So this kind of wave he's riding is new for him as well. And he has to be careful at the same time as he really has to, he has to grab the red meat when it's thrown at him. So he's actually in a pretty precarious situation as well. It's almost like he has to be careful, but he has to jump at the same time. So I think Baber is in a great position to bait Pierre into making the stands that he'd be otherwise a little bit careful about making.
Well, and that's kind of also the fun of these, leadership races, and you see this in primaries in the U.S. and the Republican side. That what ends up happening is that you're talking to the conservative base, you're talking to an audience of people who fundamentally share your values, and you can go a lot further than you might when you're talking on a federal stage or a federal election. So it's really interesting to your point to see maybe if Baber and Leslyn Lewis can kind of push Pierre into more of the populist red meat conservative stuff and pull that out of him, because maybe you'll have to go down that path in order to be leader, and then it's a fun part for us as independent journalists to make sure we hold these guys to account, because as we've seen far too often in the last couple of years, conservatives say one thing over here to get elected from their base and you get put in as leader, and then when it comes to the national stage, they change their tone and they're afraid of the media and they just want everyone to like them, and it's a totally different thing. Harrison, do you think we run that risk with this crop of candidates, and what specifically are you looking out for tonight?
Well, I think tonight what I really want to see is Leslyn Lewis break out of what I felt was a bit of a hole she found herself in. She was really hammering on the Freedom Convoy and laying into that message. I think she has more to offer, and I'm looking forward to seeing what she has to say on some of the, specifically some of the Western issues. I think that's a place where she lacks. And I think obviously, in my opinion, with Roman Baber, I don't know if he's necessarily expecting to win the leadership, but he's a part of the race to make sure that he puts himself on the federal level. In many ways, I think he's already done that and proven to be successful in that. So if Roman Baber can have a similar performance as he did last week, I think he'll continue to ride this momentum. I'm looking to see how Patrick Brown handles some of the heat I'm sure he's going to receive on stage. And yeah, like I said, I'd like to see what Leslyn Lewis has to offer that is outside of what we know about her stance on the Freedom Convoy.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I hope she sort of expands and touches more on some of the great policies. She's putting out some great stuff in terms of her ideas for the party. I know that she put out a whole sort of pro-natalism, pro-mother, pro-family set of policies that include, doubling your CCB, Canadian Child Care Benefit, if you don't enroll your children in one of these government daycare schemes. She wants to offer women 2 years maternity leave. She wants to start paying this child benefit when the mother is pregnant, 12 weeks in, just to help with costs that come with bringing in a little one into the world. And I think those are the kind of things that conservatives really need to be talking about and promoting, the sort of our own policy agenda, conservative policy agenda. One name we haven't mentioned yet is Scott Aitchison. Do either of you gentlemen want to comment on his performance in the last debate and what you expect from him tonight? Maybe Harley, you can take a crack at this one.
Well, he's a fellow British Columbian. I felt Scott, the only thing that stuck out to me is he just was kind of like one of those let's all get along guys. I mean, every time two people started going at it, or three people, he'd be like, let's just calm down. Let's all play it nice. I don't think that's going to cut it here. I think he's going to have to jump in. He's going to have to take the gloves off and start swinging with the rest of them, because that's not the situation we're in as a country, and certainly as a leadership election campaign.
What about you, Harrison? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Scott Aitchison is one of the only candidates to really come out strong on supply management, and that seems to be the one thing he's very confident about. And it is a touchy issue, especially even in the conservative base. So he's in Alberta. He's got a chance to pick up on the performance. I think he came out as sort of one of the softer candidates on stage, and maybe he can lean into that one policy on supply management that he seems really to be quite strong on.
Yeah, it's almost to me a little off-putting because Scott Aitchison seems like a really great guy, nice guy interpersonally, and sort of has that quaint, quirky sort of small town mayor type feeling, which I think he was a small town mayor before he became a federal politician, and even his message, let's all get along. But as we all know, the supply management is such a precarious issue in the party,
Yeah.
and it's so divisive. And I just remember this really cringy moment from Andrew Scheer because he infamously supported the supply management policy and was able to beat Maxime Bernier in his own riding during the 2017 leadership race. And then at one of the whatever press gallery dinners or whatever, he pulled out a big jug of milk and started drinking it, and it was like just to rub it in, like add insult to injury that he wasn't really a free marketer. But I find it a little surprising that Scott Aitchison, who is this sort of very establishment, very like centrist sort of Tory from Ontario, or Harley, you said he's from BC. I thought he was from Ontario, but he represents a riding in Ontario, and it just seems like I'm for free market, so I think it's great that he's taking that position. But I barely hear him talk about it. He didn't bring it up once at the last debate, so it's interesting.
Yeah,
he's Ontarian. You're right. I just double checked myself.
Okay.
He found himself in a position where he knows that he's probably got the smallest profile out of all the candidates, and he needed that one policy that he was going to basically make his name on. It's a bold strategy, as you said, but if he's not going to bring it up now in this debate, when will he have a great chance to get some sound bites out of it? Otherwise, I think it's kind of a wasted move.
Yeah, absolutely. So people are just wondering, the debate's supposed to have started. It's 8:02 Eastern time here. And my understanding is that they are just doing an intro of the candidates. They're playing videos. So we have a few minutes, but I promise as soon as the debate is introduced and they get going, we will cut to that. And just to sort of fill you in again for anyone who's just tuning in, so the debate is 2 hours long. It's live on location out in Edmonton. Andrew Lawton told us that there were about 800 to 1,000 people in the room. So it's going to be a big room full of conservative activists and volunteers and the sort of grassroots of the party in the sort of heartland of the party and the movement, which is Alberta. So really, it's going to be fun just to watch it, witness it. And then afterwards, we'll be back. We'll do a live show. We'll have Harrison Faulkner, Harley Sims. I believe our colleague Elie is also going to be jumping on for that. And then, of course, Andrew Lawton will be in those scrums. So following the debate, 6 candidates, they'll each have 5 minutes to what we call scrum, answer questions from the media. The media will be jumping in and asking them follow-up questions. So, we've got a long live broadcast planned for you, and, keep up the conversations. It's fun to watch. We can see both the Facebook and the YouTube comments popping up in our stream. So, let us know where you're watching from. Let us know if you have any specific questions that you'd like addressed, and we will be we will be back after the debate to give sort of live reaction, and then we'll cut to the scrums as they happen. So thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate everyone for watching. We are going to head on over to the debate. We'll cut the camera over to the live stream of the debate in Edmonton, and then we will be back in 2 hours' time. So enjoy the debate, and thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you to Harley and Harrison. Thanks to the behind-the-scene team at True North for throwing this event together. We appreciate that. And yeah, let's have a good debate. Here we go.
During the debate so that we can get through a very busy agenda.
In the debate rules, we were very clear that there were to be no signs or noisemakers, and this is the one rule we really plan to enforce. So if anybody disrupts the room, you will be removed. So please, no clapping, booing, cheering, or jeering. Let's have a great evening tonight. It is now time to introduce our moderator. For the last 7 years, he's been the chair of Global Public Affairs, but for 45 years, he was a fixture in the living rooms of Canada as one of this country's most distinguished journalists. He's interviewed every prime minister since John Diefenbaker.
Please welcome Mr. Tom Clark.
Thanks very much, Rick and Diane, and good evening, Edmonton. How are you? Terrific. And in fact, good evening, Canada, because this event is being broadcast live right across the country by CBC and by CTV, so this is for everybody. I want to thank all of you to start off with, and of course the organizing committee, for inviting me to participate in what is going to be a very important evening. And frankly, I don't know who was more courageous, them or me, but anyway, here we are. This is going to be a very big night for Conservatives, obviously, for all of you in the room and Conservatives across the country, because you will have the opportunity to listen, to assess, and ultimately to judge who among these 6 candidates is the best one to lead the party into the future. I would also say that this is a very big night for Canadians everywhere in Canada, regardless of political stripe or affiliation, because good, healthy, informed, and yes, passionate debate is the very lifeblood of a good, healthy democracy. And therefore, everybody has a real stake in what happens on this stage tonight. So a couple of quick notes before we begin. I want to back up what Rick and Diane said. As they say in the theater business, please remain seated for the entire performance. No clapping, no booing, nothing. You know the consequences of what will happen if you do. But honestly tonight, let's just leave the stage to these 6 people. I think that's the right way to go. I'm going to be calling a pretty tight game tonight. There is going to be no mushiness on time. We're going to keep to a tight schedule. And also, I'm going to be expecting some pretty clear answers to some pretty clear questions, and I hope you are expecting the same. Final quick note. There are 5 distinct parts of this debate, and as we begin each part, I will be reminding the candidates of what the rules are, what the format is, and what the timing is, and through them, you'll be hearing the same thing. So you'll know at the beginning of each segment exactly where we're going to go and what we're going to be doing. Buckle up, everybody. Now, please welcome your candidates for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Thank you. Good evening, candidates. Everybody well? I do believe this is my problem. I'll be right with you. There we go. Thank you so much. Okay. So good evening. To remind you of what we are going to do right off the top, as you know, we gave you, in a sense, a little assignment before you came here. You've been working on this, no doubt diligently, for a couple of days now, but what we asked you to do was to finish this sentence. My vision for Canada is. You will have 45 seconds in which to tell us what your vision is, and but there's a twist, and you know it. You can't mention any other candidate on the stage, and you can't mention any other federal leader. If you do, there's going to be trouble, and here's what you're going to hear. Now, I will then, after you've done your segment, I will engage you. You have 30 seconds to engage with me, and then we'll move on. The draw has been done, and we are going to start this debate with Mr. Scott Aitchison. Mr. Aitchison, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My vision for Canada is to renew the promise that the next generation will be better off than today's. High grocery bills, a housing crisis, inflation, all make life harder. Millions of Canadians are struggling to make ends meet, and a Liberal government does little more than make inflation worse. Divisive rhetoric leaves millions of Canadians feeling frustrated and even demonized by their own government. The answer to today's challenge is not to fan the flames of those frustrations and make Canadians more angry. Those politics of division have left you behind. You deserve leaders who care more about your success than our own. I seek to lead the Conservative Party and our team to form a government that delivers more than just photo ops, but real solutions to the challenges we face.
You're
Join
done.
me, and
Thanks.
we will build that future together.
Thanks very much. Quick question to you. You were saying you want to take the politics of division out of the equation. How do you do that?
Repeat the question, please.
How do you take the politics of division out of the equation?
It's the divisive rhetoric that we need to take out of our discourse. And all parties are guilty of it. I'll give you the most obvious example, and I'm going to use the name of another party leader now because I think I'm allowed to. But if you look at the way the Prime Minister used vaccine mandates and actually divided Canadians by demonizing one group over another,
you know the rules.
that's wrong.
You just broke them. We're moving on.
Okay.
Roman Baber, your vision of Canada is?
Thank you. My name is Roman Baber. My vision for Canada is a return to being a credible democracy, that we don't censor people or speech, that we end 21st century segregation and let people make their own medical decisions, that we restore Canadian kindness and respect diversity of opinion. My vision for Canada is that we unleash our economic opportunity by making us a natural resources superpower. My vision for Canada is that we let Canadians work, love their families, and that government finally leave us alone. Thank you.
Quick question, and we're going to get into the debate, but Mr. Baby, you want Canada to become an energy superpower in the world. In 30 seconds, tell me, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I think that our natural resources are a blessing, and I'm not going to let oil and gas be canceled. And it's good for our strategic interests, for our economic bottom line, and it's also good for our planet. Because Canadians can derive and clean and safe energy better than any other nation in the world. We need to work with our provinces. We can restore the right balance, but that is the way out of the economic mess that we're in. I'm going to turn Canada into a natural resources superpower.
Sorry, Patrick Brown. My vision of Canada is?
My vision of Canada includes a Conservative Party that builds a broad, multi-faith, multicultural coalition that can win. We've lost 3 elections in a row, and we've forgotten how to win in areas like suburban Canada, in the GTA where I get elected. We'll never win with a divisive leader who repels voters and doubles down on discriminatory policies that trample over the religious freedoms of Canadians. The choice before the party is clear. Do we want an unelectable party leader who drives voters away, walks straight into liberal traps, giving unclear answers on divisive issues like abortion, and wedges Conservatives against each other? Are we ready to win? I'm Mayor Patrick Brown, and I'm ready to win, and we need your help.
Now, I just want to remind the audience, you're all crossing a red line here, so you want to be careful. Just let me pick up, Patrick, you're talking about, like Mr. Aitchison did, the politics of division. You skated pretty close to mentioning the name of somebody on here, which you know was against the rules, so that's fine. But how do you take suburban Canada and make it conservative blue with the background that you've been talking about and the failures of the past?
You know, I look at suburban Canada, it's a mosaic of the country. And I truly believe, and I've shown, you can convince residents who have traditionally voted for other parties that their values are our values, conservative values. I've seen that in Brampton, I've seen that across the GTA, so it's really about building those relationships and telling our story, that we're the party that will fight to make sure we don't spend beyond our means, balance budgets, and fight for every Canadian. And that's key. We need to send a message. We'll fight for every Canadian, no matter their walk of life.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poilievre, your vision of Canada
is one where you, the citizens, are masters and your government is servant. It is one where people have the freedom to take back control of their lives. That means freedom from inflation, so that hardworking single mothers can afford nutritious food for their kids. Freedom from inflation so that 32-year-olds don't have to live in their parents' basements, that they can actually afford their own homes. Freedom from inflation and carbon taxes that have made it unaffordable for working people to fill their trucks with gas. The freedom to speak without fear and censorship, and the freedom to make your own medical decisions. In other words, the freedom to be master of your own destiny and a captain of your own life. Thank you.
Folks, here's the deal, supporters of any candidate. The time that you cheer is going to be taken away from your candidate. Just so you know, that's the way the deal works here. Mr. Poilievre, you talked about inflation and freedom from inflation. How many years is it going to take you to bring inflation down to what, 1% or 0%?
Well, it's hard to say how high it will be when I take office, but there's no question that we have to hold those accountable who have caused it. You know, money printing government deficits have caused more dollars chasing fewer goods, driving higher prices, and the Bank of Canada governor has allowed himself to become the ATM machine of this government. And so I would replace him with a new governor who would reinstate our low inflation mandate, protect the purchasing power of our dollar, and honor the working people who earn those dollars.
Okay, I have a feeling we'll be getting back to that point you made in a minute. Dr. Leslyn Lewis, your vision.
My vision for Canada is to once again make Canada a beacon of hope and opportunity for all. A nation where we respect our charter and where our government never has the opportunity to freeze our bank accounts without a court order. National unity is at an all-time low. Many people have been traumatized by COVID lockdowns and government mandates. I'm running to be a bridge builder, to unite the party and to unite the country. Business owners will have the confidence to take chances again. We will develop our natural resources while protecting the environment without a carbon tax. We will respect freedoms and uphold our Charter of Rights. I'm running to make Canada one of the freest and most
Dr. Lewis, you're out of time. Let me quickly pick up on one thing that you said. You said that we have never been so divided, or national unity has never been so challenged. What are you basing that on?
If we look at the last 2 years, we have seen families torn apart by COVID. We see parents not talking to children. We've seen a government that has pit Canadians against each other. There are millions of people who cannot travel in their own country, people who are unemployed. The government has used COVID to divide Canadians, and it's time for us to heal.
Folks, I've really got to, I don't want to stop the debate, but we will, if necessary. You've been asked a number of times now, please don't do that. So I'm asking you once again, please don't do that, or your candidate will get penalized. Finally, Jean Charest, your vision of Canada is?
Well, thank you very much. And first, let me say how delighted I am to be here in Edmonton, Alberta, and to join with my fellow candidates on this stage. You're asking the fundamental question of this leadership campaign, and the reason I'm running is because I see a country that is deeply divided. And I am running because I believe that national unity is the #1 challenge of any prime minister in this country. That nothing big, nothing of substance gets done unless we're able to bridge the country between the East and the West. And that's what I've done all my life. It's what I've fought for. And that's what the Conservative Party needs to be about in the next election campaign, to offer that national vision.
Let me just pick up on one thing that you said. You're talking about East and West. You know, in the battles gone by, it was always Quebec, and is Quebec in or is Quebec out? How much of the East is about Quebec, and that national unity piece is about Quebec?
It isn't just about one province. It can never be about just one province. It's about the whole country, Tom. And you know, on issues like energy, for example, whether it's oil, gas, or pipelines, or mining, we as a country need a national leader who is going to stand up for the resource industry. When have we ever heard the Prime Minister say, I believe in this project. I think it should happen. And yes, please, I'm delighted to name him, but if you want me to.
You heard that.
I did.
You broke the rules.
Well, and I did it
anyway.
deliberately. Thank you.
Okay. We're moving on to the second section of the debate now, and let me just quickly remind the candidates of what this is all about. We are asking you a series of rapid-fire questions on a number of policy issues, and we're looking for a yes or no. The question will be very clear. There will be no doubt about the yes or no answer, but there's also 15 seconds right away for you to expand a little bit or qualify your yes or no if you wish. You don't have to, but you can if you want to. Once everybody is answered, I will choose two of the candidates who perhaps have opposing views and query it a little bit more and let you talk a little bit, and we will be moving on. The draw has been done for this as well, and I'm just looking for how much time you've got here. 15 seconds, then 30 seconds when we come back when I pull the two people out. Okay. Rapid fire question. Here we go, and we're starting with Dr. Lewis, and then we'll work down the line from there. Dr. Lewis, the war in Ukraine, as we all know, has been an unspeakable tragedy, and it continues as we speak tonight. Carnage and destruction are unimaginable. Do you support creating a no-fly zone over Ukraine?
The attack on Ukraine should be taken seriously. We have to ensure that we do not exacerbate the tensions that are already there.
Is that a no?
Oh, that's right. No.
No. Thank you very much. Moving on. Mr. Weber.
No. You know, my mother's family is from Ukraine. I'm heartbroken. We're witnessing a catastrophic loss of life and infrastructure. There needs to be a greater effort to end the conflict. Escalation will not get us out of it. The only way to end it is to bring the sides to a ceasefire.
Mr. Charest.
We could only do that if our NATO allies agreed. Canada can't do that alone. We all admit that. What we need to do in Ukraine is three things. Lethal weapons for Ukraine. That's what they need, and that's what Canada should do more of. More aid, and bringing Ukrainians who want to come to Canada here in this country so that they're secure.
I'm not sure whether that was a yes or a no.
It's a no. If our allies are not there, Tom, we can't do it.
Mr. Aitchison.
No, and I'll build on what Mr. Charest said. Part of the problem, of course, is that we've never met the 2% of our GDP in terms of military funding to meet our commitments to NATO. Canada's not a reliable partner in the world, and we need to do a lot better than we are.
Mr. Brown.
Yes, I believe Canada should push and actively advocate and be part of it to show that NATO is serious about these encroachments. We need to stand steadfast with our allies in Ukraine.
Mr. Poilievre.
No, but I believe we should provide more lethal weapons to our Ukrainian allies and offer refuge to Ukrainians who are fleeing. We also need to unleash Canadian energy production so that we can help break European dependence on Putin.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to go with Patrick Brown and Mr. Poilievre on this because you have opposing views. Mr. Brown, you said that we should encourage and participate in a no-fly zone over Ukraine. You, Mr. Poilievre, say no. So, Mr. Brown, let me ask you about the concerns that people have about escalating a war by doing such a thing as a no-fly zone, which would require offensive fire against, for example, radar stations and installations.
Well, I certainly don't believe we should abandon our allies, and the pleas from Ukraine need more than promises and best wishes. We are seeing an encroachment in Europe that has not been seen in the modern era, and we need to make sure they know that Canada stands with them more than our wishes and photo ops with the Prime Minister showing up in Ukraine. We need to give them all the support they've asked for, which includes, and that's the request from Ukraine.
And Mr. Poilievre, if I could just play off of that, you say no, and yet it's the very thing that the Ukrainian government has asked for over and over again, the no-fly zone.
Right. The reason is that if we bring in a no-fly zone, it could very quickly escalate to Canada being in a war with Russia. And I'm not standing on the stage today promising to declare that war. I'm making the responsible position that will provide the material support necessary that we can as Canadians, both to the population and to those fighting against Russians, but also do what we can strategically to provide Europe with an alternative source of energy so that the Europeans no longer have to fund Russia's war with machine by buying all of its oil and gas.
Thank you very much, both of you. Next question, Mr. Baber, it goes to you. Way back in the 1970s, you may not be able to remember that, but nevertheless, ancient history, but Pierre Trudeau brought in supply management, basically a state-run system to manage dairy and poultry industries in this country, setting huge tariffs for foreign products and in the process inflating prices here at home. Do you support the current supply management system? Yes or no?
No, there is no free country when you have centrally planned economy. Instead of protecting supply management and central Politburo planning, we should not cap how much dairy Canadians may produce. It's utter nonsense. I oppose supply management.
Mr. Charest.
I fully support supply management. I always have. And in this era of supply chains that are disrupted, this is, in fact, a policy that guarantees us access to food that we need. So I unequivocally support supply management.
No, I don't. In fact, supply management costs the average Canadian family about $600 a year. I think it's important in an affordability crisis that we actually help Canadians make food cheaper to eat. That's the problem with supply management. It's costing too much for Canadians.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Yes, the party has a history of supporting supply management, but I think it's fair in this affordability crisis to have a broader consultation with our membership.
Mr. Poilievre.
I do support supply management. The alternative would be to buy out the quota, and that would cost $10, $20, $30 billion, and that would have to be done through a tax on consumers, which could be more expensive than the alternative. We should lower food costs by getting rid of the carbon tax and other taxes that are driving up the cost of food.
Mr. Aitchison and, I'm sorry, Dr. Lewis, my apologies. Supply management.
I do support supply management. Our dairy and egg producers give us superior products. Without supply management, our industry would be overrun by U.S. producers. I prefer to have a superior product that we'll pay a little bit more for, and if we want to bring down the price, cut the carbon tax.
Okay. I'm going to ask Mr. Baber and you, Dr. Lewis, because you hold opposing views on this. Mr. Baber, why don't you tell Dr. Lewis exactly why it is that we should not have supply management, and perhaps, as the critics of your position would say, put those industries into jeopardy?
So one of the themes today is cost of living. At a time when cost of living is so high, visit a grocery store. Life is becoming unaffordable. Why not to increase more supply instead of telling farmers how much milk they can produce? We should encourage the creation of more goods, especially if we're worried about inflation. But I support a gradual phasing out of supply management because, yes, we do have quotas and we have concessions that people bought. We have to provide them with some ease down, but we should not cap how much Canadians can produce.
Okay. And Dr. Lewis, critics of your position might say, what is a conservative doing supporting the policies of Pierre Trudeau on a state-imposed mechanism?
Well, from a free market perspective, supply management, of course, is not a free market ideology. However, we have to ensure that we support our farmers, and we have to ensure that Canadians get the best product on their table. If we want to cut costs, we can cut the carbon tax, and that is what is bringing up the cost of food for Canadians.
Thank you very much, both of you. Mr. Charest, you get the first swing at this next question. As we've seen in the United States in the last couple of weeks, there are no laws around abortion. Abortion is only allowed by the Supreme Court decision known as Roe versus Wade. And courts, as we are seeing, can change their minds. In Canada, we don't have any laws either on this. We depend on the Morgenthaler case, which essentially decided that it was not illegal. So the question is this: would you support legislation around abortion?
I am pro-choice, and my government would not bring in legislation or support legislation to change or to restrain the rights of women. The situation we have now is what we should maintain, and that is a very clear. They're all candidates except one on this stage has stated their position on this.
Mr. Aitchison.
I will always defend a woman's right to her personal reproductive health choices, period. Always.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown.
I'm pro-choice. I support a woman's right to choose, and any government that I lead would not revisit this issue.
Mr. Poilievre.
A Poilievre government would not introduce or pass legislation restricting abortion.
Dr. Lewis.
I am pro-life, and women in Canada can have an abortion up until 9 months, and so there is no restriction on abortion. What we need to do is have conversations about what we believe in,
Thanks.
what we
we're out
agree
of
on.
time. Mr. Baber.
I don't believe that government has a role in how people start and grow their families. If as conservatives we want to stay out of people's lives, then we should stay out of the most intimate areas of their lives. But that doesn't mean that we don't respect parliamentary democracy, that we gag our MPs, that we don't allow people to contest nomination. I'm wondering how all my friends feel about others in caucus who have different views.
Okay. Let's just further explore this a little bit. Mr. Charest, I want to start with you, and Mr. Aitchison, I want to bring you into the conversation as well. You say, everybody interpreted the question of a law around abortion as restricting it. What if it was a law enshrining it?
Well, it's not what's anticipated. I mean, it's clearly not the case. But on this issue, can we be clear on one thing? Every candidate in this race needs to tell the women of Canada where they stand, whether they're pro or against. The women of Canada, deserve to know where they stand. And Mr. Poilievre's answer, quite frankly, does not fit that test.
Okay. We will be taking 10 seconds away from Mr. Poilievre, but Mr. Aitchison, get in.
I think that it's
nonsense.
Yeah, Mr. Aitchison, please go ahead.
I think it's important for us to always be respectful of each other. There are really strong views and deeply held beliefs on this issue. And this is one of the problems that I see in our party today. We've become factions, and we don't listen to each other and respect each other as we debate ideas and differing opinions. Then Canadians will never trust us. And so this, to me, is about respect, and really I don't see a lot of that, unfortunately, on this issue.
Right. Thank you very much. Next question, Mr. Aitchison, we're going to start with you. Last year, Canada took in more immigrants than at any other time in our history, doubling the usual number of about 250,000, and we're planning to increase that number even more. So looking at the latest numbers of around just over 400,000, is 400,000 or a little bit more the right number to be bringing in every year into Canada?
Well, this much I know: we need more Canadians. We need more workers. We need more skilled workers in our economy. It's one of the reasons we have a housing shortage in this country. We need 200,000 skilled tradespeople in this country today. So we need more workers. Whether 400,000 is the precise number or not, it should be targeted, though.
Mr. Brown.
No, it's not enough. We're not meeting our skilled labor shortage, not even close. And the backlog right now under under the current Prime Minister is the largest it's been in Canadian history. He's not properly resourcing our immigration department. It's been an abysmal failure.
And Mr. Poilievre.
We need the workforce, frankly, but when we bring immigrants here, we need to make sure they have the freedom to own a home by getting rid of the gatekeepers that prevent housing construction, and the freedom to work in their field by getting rid of the gatekeepers that prevent them from getting licenses in their professions and trades. So I will get rid of those gatekeepers and give them that opportunity.
Dr. Lewis.
The issue is not about quantity, it's about quality. We need to make sure that we bring immigrants here who can contribute to our society. I came here when I was 5 years old, and we need a compassionate immigration system that will have jobs for people.
All right, thank you. Mr. Baber.
I'm an immigrant to Canada, and I had every blessing our country has to offer. And I think that Canada's multiculturalism is beautiful. We have an aging demographic, a shrinking labor force. We need to encourage lawful immigration. Democracy and opportunity is why immigrants come to Canada. Those are conservative values.
Thank you. Mr. Charest.
400,000 may be within the right zone, but it is very much dependent on our ability to integrate people. And how do we integrate? We integrate through a job. We integrate through language. We integrate by allowing people to integrate into communities. And credentials is one of the key elements to integrate Canadians.
Let's pick that up. Mr. Brown, I want to just explore a little bit more of your thinking. 400,000, 405,000, it's a record number for this country, but should it be 500,000, 600,000? We know that we've got a labor shortage. What's the right number?
You know, I was speaking to a friend of mine, Joseph Mancinelli, who's the head of Leuna Canada, and he told me today, just today, they're short 30,000 workers. And these are in the skilled trades, great jobs, good paying jobs. And you could change the education system, but that takes 10 years in terms of creating a new stream of workers in the skilled trades. We need that immigration. We need that talent right now. There are jobs that they can't build. Houses we can't build. Bridges we can't build because of the lack of labor. We need to unleash the Canadian economic potential through immigration.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next question now. Mr. Brown, this goes to you, actually. In 2014, at a NATO summit in Wales, the Canadian government, led then by then Prime Minister Stephen Harper, promised to spend 2% of our GDP on national defense. Since then, as you know, we haven't even come close. With a war on Europe's doorstep right now, and with our vast northern regions now vulnerable, would you meet the pledge of 2%? That is our NATO commitment.
Yes. Absolutely. Frankly, we're not taken seriously on a world stage when we can't even meet the obligations that we've committed to. And it's not just about a peacekeeping role abroad, it's about our own sovereignty, the Arctic. And so 100%.
Mr. Poilievre.
We need to work towards hitting that goal, and we need also to make sure the money we spent gets results. Right now, too much of the procurement of equipment is tied up in politics and political favoritism. That's why billions of dollars have wasted, and products are not delivered to the front line for our soldiers, sailors, and airmen. So not only will we increase it, we will spend it well.
Unfortunately, we have not invested enough in our military. Yes, I would commit to meeting that 2%. Right now, we are underfunded, and that is one of the reasons why we have not been able to supply the needs that Ukraine could use to assist them.
Mr. Baber.
Yes, we need to increase our defense spending by 50% in order to meet our NATO commitment. If we're going to ask men and women in uniform to risk their lives, then they must have the best equipment and the best training. But I believe that our defense policy should be limited to safeguarding our country and meeting our treaty commitments.
Thanks very much. Mr. Charest.
Well, the answer is yes. This is an issue of sovereignty for Canada, and I put out a defense policy that's very detailed. One thing that I think we need to do urgently is assume our sovereignty in the Arctic. And I would open 2 bases in the Arctic, one with a deep sea water port to defend our sovereignty against Russia in particular.
Mr. Aitchison.
Yes. The sad reality of this is that our military procurement system has become a joke in the world, and we waste money, and we don't have the right equipment for our men and women in service, and our partners, our allies, are making new alliances without us because we're not a reliable partner.
Mr. Poilievre, I just want to dig a little bit deeper into your answer. You said that we should work towards it, so not necessarily meeting it. But as you know, this is one of the main irritants in Canada-U.S. relations, regardless of the administration. When you say work towards it, have you got a time frame in mind as to when we get to 2%?
Look, it will take a progressive move because it's roughly an extra $14 or $15 billion a year. If you up the budget in 1 year, well, then you're going to have a bunch of bureaucrats at the Defense Department trying to shovel the cash out the door without getting proper results. In fact, they can't spend the budgets they have right now and get results. So I will increase it as fast as we possibly can within the confines of our accosted budget and towards putting those dollars into getting results for our soldiers, sailors, and airmen.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Baber, I want to come back to you on this because you have a slightly different view as to what we should be doing.
Yeah, I think that Canada's credibility in the world is eroded right now because some countries don't believe we're an actual democracy anymore. And so we need to focus on resolving our issues at home while increasing our NATO commitment, to meet our NATO commitment, and that's about 50%. But we should not go beyond our treaty commitments at this point. I appreciate the role that Canada played traditionally in peacekeeping, but now it's time for other countries to step up and take the lead. God knows we have enough problems at home at this moment.
Thank you all very much. We're going to go to the final question now. It's Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Poilievre, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission presented its final report in 2015. That is 7 years ago, and it contained 94 recommendations. Would you make a commitment to implementing all 94 recommendations?
I can't make the commitment to 100% of the recommendations, but what I can is to address the structural unfairness that leads to the injustice, and that is fundamentally in the Indian Act. We have to give First Nations communities control of their money, their land, and their resources. That is the only way that they will be able to have prosperity and paychecks for their people.
Dr. Lewis.
We need to make sure that First Nations people are at the table where the decisions are being made. And we also need to make sure that we keep our promises. We have been promising year after year clean water on reserves, and we have not delivered. If we cannot deliver on simple promises.
We have to be honest and learn our history so we don't repeat it. But dividing Canadians is actually hurting reconciliation. The best thing we can do for reconciliation is to improve the lives of Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, just in case people forgot the question, is would you commit to the 94 recommendations in the Truth and Reconciliation report?
The 94 recommendations, you can't commit to all of them. But Tom, Indigenous Canadians deserve respect, and a lot better than virtue signaling and false promises. They should be part of our resource economy. They should own equity. And I would put together a Crown Corporation that would allow them to own equity.
Okay. Dr. Lewis, I just want to come back to you because I didn't hear whether you were going to support all 94 recommendations, but can you tell me if you're not going to support all...
Scott, I didn't get a chance.
Oh, I didn't know you were here. I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry.
Don't, he's going to take time away from me. Stop.
No, yeah. Mr. Aitchison, my apologies, please.
My answer is yes, I would, but I would also make sure we eliminate all boil water advisors. I would expedite the installation of broadband internet. And my approach to reconciliation is a journey, but it will be about fewer conferences in Ottawa and more action on the ground.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brown.
Yes, having a strong collaborative relationship with Indigenous communities will be essential if we are committed to building pipelines in this country. We need to have that strong collaboration. We need to get pipelines built. We need to create prosperity in Indigenous communities and across the country.
Okay, and I just want to bring you and Dr. Lewis in because there was just one thing I didn't quite understand. Would you, Dr. Lewis, implement all 94 recommendations?
I will implement any recommendation that uplifts the lives of Indigenous people. We have let them down, even our missing and murdered Aboriginal women. We have not committed to even dealing with that issue, which is a fundamental issue that affects the core of the society on reserves.
Okay, Mr. Brown, if we don't implement all 94, what ones would we not implement of the 94? Choose one that you would not implement.
Well, my answer was that I would support the recommendation. So I said yes, and I believe it's integral for us to have that strong collaboration if we're going to have the joint prosperity through the construction of a national energy corridor and pipelines. I just don't see how you can build partnerships with Indigenous communities to get pipelines built if you ignore the recommendations that are so important to Indigenous communities across the country.
Thank you all very much on that. That ends this section of the spontaneous yes or no answers. We are now moving towards what we call the lightning round. Now let me explain. You have been informed of this. Believe it or not, there are Canadians who don't know you guys and Dr. Lewis yet. So this is a chance just to get to know a little bit about who you are and character and likes, dislikes, and that sort of thing. I'm going to ask everybody the same question. We're just going to go down the line. Everybody gets a chance. It's a very fast answer. You'll see that these things are, you got 15 seconds to answer this, and we're going to be starting with Mr. Charest. And Mr. Charest, the very first question I have for you is, what book are you reading now?
What
book are you reading now?
Oh, I was reading the most recent book that I've been reading has been about Russia. And I forget the title right now, but it's been about Russia.
Very good. Mr. Aitchison.
I'm actually reading a book that Dennis Mills, former member of Parliament for Toronto Danforth, gave me on water.
Do you remember the title?
Called Water.
Oh, it's called Water.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, would you like to know what it's about?
Okay.
It's about water.
Yeah. I get it.
It's about the future of water and the importance of water in geopolitical issues. Anyhow.
Mr. Brown, what are you reading these days?
Well, I'd say on a leadership campaign, let's be honest, there's no time to be laying around reading books, but historically I've loved, legal novels, the John Grisham books. Growing up, I loved Horatio Alger, the rags to riches stories, which is, our Canadian dream.
Mr. Poilievre, what are you having time to read these days?
Well, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules, great book, and a lot of good lessons. We all need to improve ourselves, and I think he has a lot of good wisdom in that book that could help anybody.
Dr. Lewis.
Shackleton's Way, it's about sacrificial leadership. It's about lending yourself to service for others and being a leader that people can admire and aspire to.
Thank you, Mr. Baber.
It's been difficult since the leadership started, but before that, a friend suggested that I read David and Goliath. And that's been a theme that throughout our campaign we continue to exceed expectations. Sometimes people might surprise you and you might have an unlikely result.
Mr. Aitchison, I wanted to ask you and give everybody a chance. There's a question and there's a twist to the answer. I want to know who your political hero is, and you cannot say Winston Churchill.
Prime Minister Diefenbaker. Prime Minister Diefenbaker, he was a tremendous orator. He brought us the Bill of Rights. He was an amazing Canadian who defended Canadians' freedoms and enshrined them in law.
Mr. Brown.
Absolutely. Former Premier Bill Davis. I felt he radiated decency. I learned more from him than anyone else. He lived only a few doors down from me in Brampton, Ontario. And I think his legacy is one that is enormous in our country.
Mr. Poilievre.
Well, Wilfrid Laurier. He opened up the West to immigration that brought many of my ancestors here. Though he was a Catholic, he made a point of reading a Protestant Bible so he could understand the other side. He said that he used to pick fights with the Scottish boys and flirt with the Scottish girls and managed to bring all the Canadian nations together into this wonderful country we call Canada based on the principle of freedom.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis.
Point of clarification, did it have to be Canadian? I didn't hear.
Just your political hero, as long as it's not Winston Churchill.
William Wilberforce. He spent his life fighting for the abolition of slavery, even though he never knew whether or not he would see that materialize. But he had convictions to stand up for what he believed in, and he did not matter if it sacrificed his political career.
Thanks very much. Mr. Baber.
Margaret Thatcher. We will either stand on principles or we will not stand at all. She was not afraid of making difficult decisions. She stood up to the radical left-wing mob. This is something that I hope we're going to restore to the Conservative Party of Canada. Courage to say what we believe and do what we believe is right.
Mr. Charest.
Darcy McGee, born in Ireland, went to the United States, chose to come to Canada, renounced Irish nationalism and gave his life for his country because he was assassinated, one of the only political assassinations in the country, by Fenians.
Thank you all very much. That was actually really interesting to hear all that. Dr. Lewis, I'm going to start with you, and then, of course, everybody else gets a chance. I know you're all busy. I know that you've got stuff that you're doing right now, but when you have the opportunity to sit down and listen to some music, what do you listen to?
I would say probably jazz is my go-to.
Who's your favorite jazz artist?
Coltrane.
Cool. Okay. Mr. Baber.
Amy Winehouse. When I hear Amy Winehouse, I can see into her soul. She speaks to issues of addiction and mental health, something that people know that I'm very, very passionate about. And she left us too early. But yeah, Amy Winehouse, Back to Black.
Okay. Mr. Charest.
Well, for jazz, Pat Metheny, but my family and I are also great lovers of Charles Aznavour.
There we go. Mr. Aitchison.
Well, I play the piano, so I love to listen to Oscar Peterson. But since my assistant Parker has been driving around with me, I'm starting to listen to a little more country music, so I'm learning a bit more about that.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
Well, I think I have to say Alessia Cara, because I'm from Brampton, and Alessia Cara is our most famous musician right now. And but I should also say MIA. We're trying to get them for our Canada Day party. A great story of overcoming adversity.
Terrific. And Mr. Poilievre?
Well, I'll pick a local hero, Paul Brandt, Alberta Brown. You got to let them applaud that, Tom. Come on.
Okay. I'll allow the applause because it's for Paul Brandt. Okay?
You'll have to take it off his time.
Yeah, I'll take it off his time, yeah. Mr. Brown, I want to start with you. What do you think is, and remember 15 seconds, okay? What do you think is the single biggest threat to Canada today?
Our financial chaos right now. We're $1.2 trillion in debt, and if you allow the finances to get out of control of the country, you lose all capacity to deal with the challenges in your country. $1.2 trillion, $2 billion a month in interest.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poilievre.
Well, I would build on that. It's not just the 1.2 trillion federal, but the other plus trillion provincial, and then the other $7 trillion of private debt that is about to collide with higher interest rates. The government and the central bank have set us up for a massive debt crisis, and we don't have time to avoid it.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis.
I think our declining democracy, people have lost trust and confidence in our democracy. The invocation of the Emergency Measures Act and freezing of people's accounts without a court order has led people to question our institutions, such as the media and our political institutions.
Thank you. Mr. Baber.
100% with Dr. Lewis. The erosion of our democracy is the greatest threat to Canada right now. Government is passing law to censor speech. Millions of Canadians are treated like second-class citizens. State-funded media bailouts and state-funded media, an unlawful declaration of the Emergency Act. Okay. I'm going to defend Canada's democracy.
Right. Mr. Charest, the single greatest threat to Canada is?
Well, it is national unity. The greatest mistake we all could make as Canadians is to take this country for granted. And of all the things you've named on this stage at colleagues, none of them can be addressed unless there is a national Conservative government that includes Alberta at the table. That's what is the most important threat, our national unity.
Mr. Aitchison.
And I'll build on that. I think the greatest threat to Canada right now is division. It's our political rhetoric and a political system that's designed to divide us to win votes. It's short-sighted and doesn't build a country up at all, and I think it's dividing our country.
Thank you all very much. I want to go to a question maybe a little more lighthearted, getting to know you a little bit more. And there are a lot of people who want to know this. It's not just me, trust me. But Mr. Baber, what was the last thing that you binge-watched on TV?
Married with Children. I was at the cottage, and that was some time ago. I learned the English language watching Married with Children with subtitles. It's a great tool for new Canadians to learn English. Watch a good TV show.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Charest.
It was a French series that was absolutely fantastic because it speaks to the relationships. C'est Appelle mon agent, call my agent in English. It was absolutely spectacular.
I like that one too.
Yeah.
Mr. Aitchison.
My parliamentary colleague Eric Malillo got me hooked on Brooklyn Nine-Nine while we were doing French immersion in Quebec.
Mr. Brown, yeah.
You know, normally if I have free time, I love watching hockey, no surprise there. But my wife got me into Ozark and we binge watched it, and I'm told there's a new season out right now and I'm too busy to watch it. So I'm in trouble with my wife. We'll have to watch it without me.
I've seen the final season and I won't tell you how it ends. But you can imagine. Mr. Poilievre.
Well, I think it was Netflix had a series on Trotsky, actually. And it helped me to better understand the diabolical evil of communism and totalitarian socialism. But you know, the bright side is it helped me appreciate the freedom that we have in Canada that we have to stand up for and defend.
Thanks very much. Dr. Lewis.
Bridgerton. And what I loved about that is that people, it was a different era, and people did not see race. They just existed and coexisted. And it was very beautiful because I also watched it in French and also improved my French.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all very much. We've got one question left, and then we're going to go back to some other stuff. But this is a good one, and Mr. Poilievre, I'm going to throw this one to you. What historical figure from any time, anywhere, would you most like to have dinner with?
Abraham Lincoln. I think through principle and courage, he saved the American Union and ended slavery. He did so at great, obviously, ultimate personal sacrifice with his eventual assassination. But he had an incredible brain that he taught himself as an autodidact, coming from humble beginnings as a working class person.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lewis.
Nelson Mandela, he existed at a time when his country was divided, torn apart by racial hatred, and yet he fought against it. He was able to overcome and bring people together.
Mr. Baber.
Ronald Reagan. He opposed one of the greatest evils of the 20th century, opposed the radical left and communism, and did it with grace and with courage. And we need to be resolute in the face of all those that would seek to erode our democracy. I admire him very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Charest.
I'm a great fan of the partnership of Sir John A. Macdonald and Georges-Étienne Cartier. And my son and I wrote a chapter in a book about Georges-Étienne Cartier, who showed extraordinary resilience, promoted property rights, and was one of those who allowed this country to actually come to be.
You know, Sir John A. would probably stick you with the bill for that dinner, but that's another thing altogether. Mr. Aitchison.
Mine is actually Nelson Mandela as well. He's a hero. How he brought South Africa together and ended apartheid is nothing short of miraculous and incredible.
Final word to you, Mr. Brown. Dinner.
Well, I'll agree with Mr. Charest. John A. Macdonald, I resent the cancel culture we're seeing on, great figures who built our country, and the adversity, the challenges of uniting our country, building Canada. That would be a fascinating dinner.
Sorry, I'll figure this out by the end of the debate, my microphone. Thank you all very much. That was fascinating. I know it was a weird little journey to go on, but I think it was interesting. We are now moving on to the next segment of the debate, which is called Face Off. And before we start that, I'd like to bring Em up, who is going to give you all a prop. And I'll explain to everybody what this is all about. So as we are handing these out, this, in a way, is the segment that you've all been waiting for, when the candidates can choose who they want to debate on any particular issue. And here's the way it's going to work. I'll introduce the topic of the debate to a candidate. Not the question, just the topic. And then you decide, you tell the audience who you want to debate this with. Once you've chosen your opponent, I will then tell you what the question is. There will be 3 rounds of the person you have chosen to debate. The first round, each person gets a minute each. The second round, you get 45 seconds each. The third round, you get 30 seconds each. Now, this is where it gets interesting and why you have the prop in your hand. After we've done the 3 rounds between the 2 people, anybody else can enter this by simply raising your paddle. And you will have a guaranteed 30 seconds to put your 30 seconds in with. Here's the trick. There are 6 questions, and you can only use your paddle 5 times. You can use it all on one question if you want, or you can use it wherever you think you have the greatest advantage. So there is some strategy involved here, and I wish you good luck with this. Now, unless there are any questions, we are going to start. And question number 1. Mr. Poilievre, the topic is law, order, and blockades. Who would you like to debate?
Patrick Brown.
Patrick Brown, okay. Here then, Mr. Poilievre, is the question. And remember, you have 1 minute in the first round to say your piece. We've seen over the past few years blockades at our borders, blockades on rail lines, blockades of construction, blockades at logging sites, and a blockade and an occupation of our capital city. Law enforcement experts say we will likely encounter more and more of this as the years progress. How do you decide when a protest becomes a threat to our national security and our national economy, and would you outlaw any protest that disables critical infrastructure, and that includes our cities?
And that includes?
Our cities.
I believe that blocking critical infrastructure should be illegal. And that's why before the truckers even arrived on Parliament Hill, I said I supported their peaceful and law-abiding efforts to restore their liberties and their livelihoods while condemning any individuals who broke laws, blocked critical infrastructure, or behaved badly. That's what individual responsibility actually means. Now, I just find it interesting that you didn't include in your list of threats the axe-wielding terrorists who've been attacking our pipeline workers in Western Canada. I don't know why that doesn't seem to be a trouble to you, but or the rest of the national media, because you're more concerned about truckers who lost their jobs because of an unfair vaccine mandate imposed on them by a prime minister who was targeting them without any scientific basis than you were about holding accountable people who've actually done violence and most recently just set the car on fire of someone who was investing in the energy sector.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, you have 1 minute.
Tom, I don't support illegal blockades, whether it's at the Ambassador Bridge, whether it's against a pipeline. I think Conservatives need to stand for law and order, full stop, and illegal blockades have a massive cost on the country. You look at the cost when there was the blockade on the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor. I was just visiting Mayor Drew Dilkins in Windsor just last week, and he was talking about how it affected their economy, Ontario's economy, Canada's economy, and I think Conservatives are the party of law and order, and we can't give exceptions to that. Full stop, no illegal blockades.
You haven't used your full time, but if you want to give it back, that's fine. We could always use it.
Well, in terms of law and order, I would just add that there are areas that the Conservative Party have not focused on enough in Parliament. I look at bail reform. You know, I see it in the GTA. There is a giant loophole in our criminal justice system, and you've got frequent flyers. Literally the same people getting arrested and released again and again, and there's a cost to public safety with that.
Mr. Poilievre, you have 45 seconds.
Well, there is, and there's also a cost to the approach taken by Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Charest. They both believe in targeting law-abiding people who use firearms responsibly after having been vetted, licensed, and are already in possession of a license and training. Charest went after them with a long gun registry in Quebec. Trudeau wants to spend $1 billion targeting these same people. That money that Charest and Trudeau spent going after law-abiding people could have been spent reinforcing border security to stop the 80% of gun crimes that actually come in through smuggling and and we could also, instead of going after the lawful, target the criminals who would do the crimes with mandatory prison sentences to take them off our streets.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, 45.
You know what? We do have a huge problem at our border, and I get briefings almost on a weekly basis by the Chief of Police in Peel, and we've had meetings with all the Chiefs of Police in the GTA to talk about smuggled firearms. 90% of our homicides last year in Peel were from firearms smuggled across the border, and we need a government of Canada that would take that seriously. Criminal organizations are becoming more sophisticated than ever before in terms of getting firearms into our country using new technology. And we need to actually listen to our law enforcement. You know, in Ottawa, we have a government that announces photo ops and press releases when it comes to firearm policy. They're not listening to law enforcement, and we desperately need them to.
Mr. Poilievre, 30 seconds.
Remember, the state needs to be under the law, and what Trudeau is now doing is unlawful censorship. C-11 is an attempt by him to give his bureaucrats the power to control what you see and say online, and to take down things that he doesn't agree with. That is not lawful. That is not democratic. I will repeal those laws, and I will restore the freedom of speech as a principle for the federal government, and also bring financial penalties to universities that shut down open and free debate on campuses.
And Mr. Brown, 30 seconds to you.
You know, I would just add that when it comes to firearm legislation in this country, we have bad legislation on top of bad legislation, and we've got a government that is missing the mark. One of the reasons we've had a proliferation of gun and gang violence, where there's no respect for postal codes and jurisdictions, is there isn't a concerted national approach. Under Prime Minister Harper, there were serious consequences. We understood that we had to draw a line when it came to gun crime in our country, and we need the same strict approach again.
Thank you very much, the two of you. Mr. Charest, you're first up, and anybody else, if you want to get in, just raise your paddle. Mr. Charest, 30
Thank
seconds.
you, and since I've been brought into this debate, let me start by pointing out that Mr. Poilievre is very conveniently rewriting history tonight. The fact of the matter is, he did support illegal blockades. We all admit that this was a mess created by Mr. Trudeau, unnecessary, a total mess. But I disagree with anyone who has a privileged position of making laws supporting illegal blockades that have cost us millions of jobs and cost us investment in this country.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Baber and then Dr. Lewis.
This is a good opportunity to set the record straight. Everything that Justin Trudeau said about the protests in Ottawa turned out to be false. There was no foreign collusion.
That's right.
There was very little foreign funding. The arson was not connected, and there were no weapons found anywhere near the site. And on February 18th, we saw, as the government was breaking the rule of law with an unlawful declaration of emergencies, the protesters remained peaceful. There was no resistance, no assaults, and on February 18th, we saw this was a truly peaceful movement.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Go ahead.
I think we're missing the point about the illegal blockades. If elected officials had just listened to the truckers, they would not have been there that long. In addition, the vulnerability that Canadians face knowing that Big Brother can go into their account and freeze their account without a court order, that has set our democracy into a declining state. We need to uphold our Charter of Rights. We need to uphold our freedoms and ensure that governments never do that again.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to get in on this? Going. You want? Okay, Mr. Baber, second chance.
I just want to talk about an important issue. My first law job was at a community legal clinic where I picked up a lot of compassion and love for people. Far too often, our criminal justice system criminalizes addiction and mental health. I'll come down hard on sex offenders, on gun violence and traffickers, but imposing strict criminal penalty for possession does nothing to deter drug addiction or heal addiction. We have a mental health and addictions catastrophe in our country, and we need a justice system that recognizes it and offers Canadians a treatment and a way out.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Poilievre.
I think Dr. Lewis raised an excellent point about the government's abuse of the Emergency Act to freeze bank accounts. Well, now there's a proposal to create a central bank digital currency, which would involve people depositing their accounts, their money, with the government itself. This gives massive new powers for surveillance, control, and censorship, and gives the state far too much control over our money, and that's why I would ban a central bank digital currency and give people back control of their money from bankers and politicians.
Dr. Lewis?
Mr. Poilievre encouraged people to buy Bitcoin, which is a digital currency. So I'm quite surprised that he is saying now that he would ban digital currency, as if he does not know that Bitcoin is a digital currency. He also encouraged people to cash in their fiat currency, their paper money, and buy Bitcoin. If they had done that, they would have lost $37,000 by the time he had said that, do that to today. So I'm very concerned about that.
Mr. Poilievre.
Well, that's just false. One, Bitcoin is not a central bank digital currency. It is obviously not. It's not controlled by any central bank anywhere in the world. Two, people can make their own investment decisions. I've simply said they should be free to decide whether or not they want to use Bitcoin. I don't want to be like communist China and ban Bitcoin or other technologies, because in a free market, people should have the opportunity to make those decisions for themselves. That's my position.
Thank you very much. Are we done? No, Dr. Lewis, one more time.
In fact, Mr. Poilievre said that you could hedge against inflation, which is not true. So Mr. Poilievre is promoting a decentralized currency over his own government's currency. That is a problem for someone who held a shadow cabinet position as a finance minister.
Sorry, Mr. Charest and then Mr. Brown.
Well, on Bitcoin, I mean, everyone just finds it totally bizarre what Mr. Poilievre is suggesting. We all get it on blockchain, that's fine. Bitcoin has lost 60% of its value since November of last year, 20% in the last month. Anyone following his advice that we saw on YouTube would have lost 20% of their earnings. Do you actually think your parents enjoy having your parents lose 20% of their retirement funds? I mean, this is lunacy, and it doesn't make sense at all.
Mr. Brown.
I have to agree with Dr. Lewis and Mr. Charest. I disagree with Mr. Poilievre's approach that you can opt out of inflation with cryptocurrency. Magic internet money fluctuates vastly, 30% or more in one day. And the last thing we should be doing is encouraging our parents and grandparents, along with vulnerable families, to gamble their savings, their retirements in something this risky that's been learned watching late-night YouTube videos.
Mr. Poilievre.
Well, Mr. Brown, that's not what I said. You're misleading the public. I clearly stated that people should have the freedom. Now, the reason why many people have chosen to exercise that freedom is because central banks have been attacking the value of our national currencies by printing $400 billion here in Canada, leading to 30-year highs in inflation, doubling the house prices, leading to massive volatility in many sectors of our economy. And that risk is one I pointed out earlier on and could lead to another debt crisis. So frankly, we should protect the value of our traditional money rather than banning private money.
Mr. Brown, you're up.
So Mr. Poilievre just said that he didn't say that. No one in this room and no one in Canada will believe that you didn't say you can opt out of inflation through cryptocurrency. That is misleading. Your words are there. You can Google it yourself and watch it on the internet. And I have to say, it is bad advice to be giving to Canadians that is so risky. And you should know that. As a former finance critic, that's not the advice you should be giving to the country.
And Mr. Poilievre, you raised your paddle for one more time.
Mr. Brown, if you want to talk about risks to people's finances, you were the one who said, you promised when you ran for the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, you would oppose a carbon tax. And then as soon as you got in, you reversed yourself entirely. Not only did you endorse just any carbon tax, you endorsed the carbon tax of Justin Trudeau, which is in place today and recently increased and is one of the reasons why prices are so high across this country. That is a threat to our money. That is a decision you made after you promised not to. People can't believe a word you said.
Mr. Bever.
I can't believe that you have a bunch of politicians here, career politicians, giving people investment advice. Let's distinguish the issue, okay? There's digital currency controlled by government that has government friction potentially and compromises our privacy. And then there's investment decisions that people make. Human ingenuity is great. We should encourage research and development and diversified portfolios. But we should behave like conservatives again and not tell people what they should and should invest in. Maybe we should oppose supply management. Maybe we should oppose equalization. We should not be afraid of being who we are. Enough.
Mr. Baber, that's great. Are we all done? Okay. I do remind you, you've only got 5. So, talking about bank accounts. I don't know, but somebody over there does. And they will tell me, and I will tell you. All of this conversation, though, leads neatly to my next question. And the topic is the future of the party. Mr. Charest, who would you like to debate on the future of the party?
Mr. Poilievre.
Mr. Poilievre, there we go. The question, the leadership campaign, this leadership campaign has been particularly vicious on a personal level. We've seen that. We've heard candidates call each other liars, accuse others of having no integrity. One of you even says it sounds like a kindergarten class. There are also deep divisions on a lot of policy issues, from abortion to zero emissions. The Conservative movement has split before in the recent past. We know that. So the question to you, Mr. Charest and Mr. Poilievre, how do you make room in the Conservative tent for all those who hold opposing views to yours? How does the party enter the next election? How can the party enter the next election united? Mr. Charest, you have 1 minute.
Tom, this is for all those listening to us tonight and in the room, this is the key question. They know, everyone knows that the Trudeau government needs to get out of office, and they're looking to the Conservative Party of Canada as a national alternative. And the question they're asking themselves is this: are you up to the task? Are you, yes or no, going to be a national Conservative alternative and party? That's our challenge, ladies and gentlemen. And what is that party? It's based on core values that we all agree on. fiscal conservatism, a market-based economy, economic policies that promote economic growth, including oil, gas, pipelines, and mining. Families also, all sorts of families, plus respecting the rule of law, a foundation of our society. There is no freedom if you do not respect the rule of law. There is no freedom. And it includes a federalism that conservatives practice, that includes Alberta, includes Ontario, Quebec, that actually makes this country work.
Mr. Poilievre, you have 1 minute.
We need to unite the party around freedom. Social conservatives want the freedom to raise their kids with their own values and preach their faith without censorship. Fiscal conservatives want the freedom to make their own financial decisions, control their own money, including without excessive taxes or carbon taxes. Rural conservatives want the freedom to own and control their own property. Progressive conservatives want for women, minorities, First Nations to have the freedom to make their own decisions without discrimination. Libertarian conservatives want freedom of speech, freedom to make their own decisions online, and freedom to speak without the government censoring them. So when we unite the party along that consistent principle of freedom, then we bring all the various parts of our party together, and we electrify and excite a new generation of young people that I've been bringing into the coalition so that we can form the next government and beat Justin Trudeau.
Mr. Charest, you have 45 seconds.
I want to be very clear. I'm not running as a hyphenated conservative, ladies and gentlemen. We've had enough. We'll leave that to the Trudeau and the left to hyphenate everyone. I am not a hyphenated conservative. I am a conservative, period. You know what values I espoused and practiced all my life. And once we are rallied around those values and we're together, you also know that we will respect those who don't agree with us, who may have different views. And Mr. Poilievre talked about social conservatives. Let's talk about that. He still won't tell you his position of whether he is pro-choice or pro-life. I respect social conservatives. They will always have a place in our party. They are good people, faith-based people who deserve a place at the table and in the family.
Mr. Poilievre, 45.
Well, I believe in freedom of choice on that issue. I already said that at the very beginning. So I don't know what you missed. I don't know if you were listening. Yes, it is. That's what I said. But Mr. Charest, why didn't you take a moment to acknowledge that you're the only one on this stage who actually voted for a law that would recriminalize abortion when you were part of the Mulroney government? You did. You did. And you can take a moment now to renounce your earlier vote if you've changed your mind, but that was your position. You seem to have forgotten it. You've forgotten a lot of things about your record. You forgot that you brought in a carbon tax. You forgot that you raised the fuel tax, the sales tax, the health tax. You forgot that you banned natural gas development in your own province. You forgot you brought in a long gun registry. You seem a little bit forgetful about your record, Mr. Charest, but Canadians now remember.
No. You know, you guys know the rules. You know the consequences. Mr. Charest, 30 seconds.
I am very proud of my record as a conservative that stands on its own merits, on fiscal conservatism, on reducing the size of government, reducing taxes, which I did when I was premier, by the way. Quebecers had $1 billion less taxes paid and higher disposable income after I finished in government, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, Mr. Poilievre, thank you for at least now telling us that you are pro-choice. We understand that's what you're saying tonight. Please confirm that for us.
And Mr. Poilievre, you have 30 seconds.
I did confirm my position that I will not introduce any law on abortion as Prime Minister. I made that very clear. But Mr. Charest, you're wrong about your tax record. You raised the sales tax, the carbon tax, the fuel tax. Just like Patrick Brown, you're trying to flip-flop on it and say one thing on the stage different than what you said before. And the overall tax burden in Quebec went from 19% of the economy to 25% of the economy under your government. That is your record. You can't run away from it. I have a clear, solid record as a tax cutter that leaves more money in people's pockets.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, you have 30 seconds.
First of all, Pierre Poilievre just ran on a carbon tax and knocked on doors in Carleton literally 6 months ago, literally in the last election. Now, but let's talk about the future of the party. The future of the party, we have to win where we've lost. We've lost in suburban Canada. And I don't see us winning any new seats. Actually, I see us losing seats if we run on the same discriminatory policies that Pierre Poilievre's had a history of supporting. We must be the party that celebrates and supports religious freedom, not tramples it. Full stop.
Thanks very much. Dr. Lewis.
Well, Mr. Poilievre said that no pro-life bill will pass in his caucus, but he believes in freedom. Are you going to give your MPs the freedom to vote their conscience on issues of life?
Am I allowed to answer?
If you use your paddle, you can. That's...
Well, he's been silent on the issue, so...
Okay. Mr. Poilievre, you've raised your paddle. You have 30 seconds.
I do believe in free votes. So there's your direct answer. And as for Mr. Brown, sorry, Patrick, you told the members of the Conservative Party in Ontario that you were against a carbon tax. Then you flip-flop and embraced a carbon tax. You said that you were a pro-life social conservative, and then after you became leader, you said that social conservatives were intolerant dinosaurs. You said that you would get rid of the sex ed program in Ontario, and then you embraced it. You now attack all the Harper government policies that you enthusiastically supported and embraced when you were part of his caucus.
Thank
Nobody
you, Mr.
can believe
Poilievre.
a word that
Is
you say.
anybody else wanting to get involved in this? Mr. Aitchison, 30 seconds.
Well, I appreciate everybody talking about the importance of all the different types of conservatives. I think Mr. Poilievre gave us a great list of all the different types of conservatives. And it is important for us to respect each other and have respectful dialogue. But it's not enough just to unite conservatives. We need to win over swing voters, people who aren't part of our party. And I think that's going to be extremely difficult, especially if they watch some of the nastiness on this stage tonight.
Sorry, Mr. Baber.
I'll unite the party by restoring democracy in the Conservative Party, but most importantly, bring back disillusioned voters. Our party failed to stand up for many Canadians against lockdowns, against mandates, until the truckers came to town. Many Canadians felt that we've abandoned them, so they voted for another party, or they didn't vote at all, and now they're disillusioned with our party. I'm the only one on the stage who stood up for Canadians for 2 years, for a year and a half before it was popular, and I'll bring back disillusioned voters. We cannot win if we're not united right of center.
Anybody else? Dr. Lewis?
Mr. Baber was not the only one who stood up for Canadians who lost their jobs due to mandates, who were discriminated against, who cannot fly. I also stood up for those Canadians, and I wanted to make that point.
And Mr. Brown, I believe you've got one left.
Okay. Well, let me be very clear. I was one of the only big city mayors in the country that didn't impose vaccine mandates. No firefighter, no police officer, no long-term city employee lost their job in Brampton. I stood by the right to have personal health choices. And I have to say, it's surprising during the leadership campaign that all of a sudden Pierre Poilievre comes out against mandates, because in the heat of the battle, he didn't say a word. He was hiding in his basement at a time that I had longtime municipal employees in Ottawa calling me, asking for help. I give Roman Baber credit. He was there. He was heard. Dr. Lewis was heard. Disappeared.
Thanks very much. It would seem appropriate for me at this point, and I'm getting the information in my ear, but I want to pass it on. Mr. Brown, you've got one intervention left. Mr. Poilievre, you're out. You've used your 5. Dr. Lewis, so have you. I'm waiting to hear. Mr. Baber, you've got 4. Oh, you've got 1 left, Mr. Baber. Mr. Charest, you've got 3 left. Oh, good, you're keeping count. And you've got 4 left. Is everybody clear on what you've got and what you don't? Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Lewis, this next question is for you, and the topic is energy. And who would you like to debate?
I'll debate Mr. Aitchison.
Mr. Aitchison and Dr. Lewis. Excellent. Here's the question for both of you, starting with Dr. Lewis. Oil and gas, as we know, in Canada has seen a price rebound in this year, but the export growth of these commodities has been constrained by pipeline infrastructure. You've all said that you would boost the building of pipelines. There are multiple jurisdictions, as we know, that need to be involved in that process. So the question is this: how would you do this? Who would pay for these pipelines, and how would you deal with Indigenous or provincial opposition? Dr. Lewis.
Investing in Canadian oil and gas is the best way to grow our economy. We can enter into agreements with Indigenous populations that will actually enrich those populations. And many of those agreements have been entered into, and it has been beneficial in uplifting those populations. We also need to ensure that we eliminate Bill C-69 and Bill C-48, which is really crippling our local capacity to develop our oil and gas. We have to get our products to market, build pipelines. We could go through Churchill and get our products to Tidewater and offset dictatorship oil.
You haven't used all your time, but if you're conceding it, I'll go to you, Mr. Aitchison, for 1 minute.
Well, I mean, I think it's safe to say that everybody on this stage is pro-pipeline, but we do need a real plan. You know, Mr. Poilievre talks about the gatekeepers in the federal bureaucracy, and of course there are a lot there. And so probably the first thing I would do as leader of the party and as the Prime Minister is I'd make Pierre Poilievre my Minister of Natural Resources to deal with the gatekeepers and solve that problem. Gatekeepers he can fire. Second, we need to create a framework that allows more building. Clear and concise rules, we need clear guidelines, timely approvals, set timelines on these things, and get the process moving and make sure it's not delayed. We must simplify and speed up this process, stop dithering, and provide certainty. This is one of the biggest challenges that we face. Investment doesn't like uncertainty, and this is part of the problem we face here is uncertainty. We need to make it clear, concise, and put timelines on it, and I think Pierre would be perfect at that.
Dr. Lewis, you have 45 seconds.
I think it was very short-sighted for us not to invest in pipelines, and we're seeing the implications of that now. In Europe, 40% of all the oil that's purchased is purchased from Russia. We're actually financing the war between Ukraine and Russia by not getting our products to offset dictatorship oil. Every day we import 555,000 barrels of oil. We have the third largest accessible oil reserves on the planet, which we are leaving untapped. It is a great resource that we could use to rebuild our economy, develop our infrastructure. For every job that's created from the oil and gas sector, 7 splinter jobs are created across the country. This could help us out of the recession.
Mr. Aitchison, to you for 45.
Yeah, I would also add that, of course, I think we all agree that one of the reasons we're also pro-pipeline is because Canada's energy is the answer to a lot of problems in this world today. I mean, we see what's going on in Ukraine right now. In Canada, we don't even have the capacity to scale up to help countries like Ukraine and countries like Germany and Europe because we're not ready. We haven't been doing the work. We've had a Liberal government that's just gotten in the way and made things more difficult every step of the way. It's good for our economy. It's good for our environment, and it's good for advancing foreign policy. Canadian energy is some of the cleanest in the world. People don't realize that Fort Mac has reduced their carbon output from their production by over 30%. That's incredible. I guarantee you Venezuela's not doing that.
Dr. Lewis, back to you for 30, and I just underlined part of the question, which is who pays for this?
I'm sorry?
Part of the question is who pays for this?
Well, if we are building pipelines and we are selling our products and we're getting our products to market, we will have enough resources that we can reinvest back into our economy and actually improve the lives of certain regions. Even in the north, we could invest in improving those individuals' lives and making sure that we build critical infrastructures in the north, bring down the cost of fuel, assist with the high cost of food, and cancel the carbon tax.
Thank you. Mr. Aitchison, 30 seconds left for you.
And you're asking me who pays for the pipelines?
Yeah.
Yeah, industry should pay for the pipelines. There's no question about that. And if there is certainty in the process and there's certainty in the system, they're more than happy to make those investments. But it is the industry that should be doing it.
Terrific. Anybody else want to get involved in this discussion? Going, gone. Well, I think only 2 of you have paddles left, so let's move on to the next one. And Mr. Aitchison, this is a question to you, and the topic is the North. Who do you choose to debate?
Mr. Baber.
Mr. Baber it is. Okay, and here's the question, Mr. Aitchison. The largest part of our land mass in this country is north of where most Canadians live. And while incredibly beautiful, as we all know. The North is struggling economically, demographically, and now with melting ice, its very security may be at risk as hostile nations move to take advantage of that area. One could argue that the North is our biggest challenge, but it's also our biggest opportunity. So, what is your vision for the North?
My vision of the North includes actually engaging in the North. I think Mr. Charest made a very good point about making sure we have not just one, but two deep water ports in the North. You're quite correct that ice is melting, and there are other nations that are cruising through our northern waters and not all that interested in what we think about it. We need to defend the North, we need to engage with the North, and we need to be making investments in the North. But that includes, of course, our military commitments. We need to be making sure that we're not just committing 2% of GDP on military spending to meet our NATO commitments, but we also need to be making sure we're meeting commitments to protect Canada. And it's not just enough to be protecting the East and the West Coast, we have a North Coast. And it's been neglected, and we need to invest more there. And so I fundamentally think that this is about engaging all parts of our country and making sure that we can secure it at every port, at every coast.
Thank you. Mr. Baber, for 1 minute.
Thank you. The best way to help northern communities is to unlock their natural resources potential, and not just oil and gas. I'm very interested in mining. There's an insatiable appetite right now around the world for precious metals and precious minerals, and Canada and the North are blessed with them. And we can do this. We can strike the right balance, we can consult stakeholders, and we can protect the environment. But we need to end this resistance to the development of natural resources. And northern communities are going to be the greatest beneficiaries of that. That also means we'll improve infrastructure and build roads and highways in the North. Let's bring northern communities a true economic opportunity. Let's build roads. Let's start building and working in our country again. Let's get back to work.
Mr. Aitchison, back to you for 45.
I think speaking about the North also provides an opportunity to talk about housing, which is an issue that has not come up in this debate yet. And it's a crisis in this country, and it's particularly a crisis in the North. And we need to commit as a federal government, not just to ensure that big cities and southern Canada is getting things built, but we need to make sure that we make a commitment to the North as well, because the housing situation there is as much of a crisis or worse than anywhere else in Canada. And so housing would be a crucial investment to make sure that we're engaged and making sure that the health of residents in northern Canada is sound.
Mr. Baber?
I want good paying jobs in the North. I had a gentleman approach me a couple of months ago who I didn't know, and he told me that his company owned a mining permit for 15 years, and they weren't able to go ahead because local stakeholders would not consult. I know that the Supreme Court recognized that there's a duty to consult, but it doesn't mean that we can't strike a balance. We can be reasonable again. Let's mitigate environmental risk. Let's agree on profit sharing, but I will not allow to hold up the development of Canada's natural resources. We need them for the well-being of our northern communities, and most importantly, we need them to get out of the fiscal mess that the Liberal government is leaving us in.
Mr. Aitchison, you have 30.
Some debate between Roman and I think we were agreeing on almost everything here, and I think that's kind of nice. I don't really have much more to add on the issue. I think that there's been a lot of talk over the years about engaging in the North, and not a lot of action. I think that's pretty typical of this Liberal government. We've seen, when it comes to housing, lots of photo ops, but not a lot of ribbon cuttings. And I think that's disgusting, and we need to do better. And Conservatives are a party of action. And so we will get these things done, and we will engage with the North and actually do it.
Okay. Mr. Poilievre. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a very complicated show. Okay, Mr. Baber, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate my friend Scott for his kindness and for his gracious approach to this race. Perhaps it will give me an opportunity to politely respond to Dr. Lewis. I'm the only one on the stage that opposed lockdowns. I was removed from the Doug Ford caucus in January 2021 when I spoke up about the collateral harm that we're causing our health and mental health by way of locking down healthy people instead of a focused approach against a very transmissible virus. But I appreciate that she joined against mandates subsequent to the last general election. Thank you.
Mr. Charest, did you raise your paddle or did?
May I respond since it's...
No, I'm sorry. No, you can't. Mr. Charest, go ahead.
Well, thank you. And Scott and Roman have both said things that I totally agree with. And thank you for a very constructive discussion on the North, to which I want to add. Yes, I would build 2 military bases in the North, one with a deep water port. This is one of the most important issues facing our country. And this is a good city to talk about it. Edmonton has a very deep connection to the North. But it also includes affirming our sovereignty. It includes things like icebreakers, unarmed icebreakers, submarines that we also need to build to be able to patrol the North. It includes solidifying our agreement with the Americans on NORAD.
We're done. Anybody else want to? No? Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. Thank you very much. Mr. Baber, this is for you. The subject is cost of living, and who would you like to debate?
Mr. Charest.
Mr. Charest and Mr. Baber on this question. We have seen a rapid rise in the cost of living for Canadians at levels we haven't seen in 40 years. And we are certainly not alone. Every Western country is going through this right now. Under your leadership, is there anything a Canadian government can do to reverse the worldwide trend without making the wealth gap any larger in Canada than it already is today?
So I think it's important that we acknowledge the cause of inflation and the rising prices. It's not just the $500 billion in debt that we printed in the last 2 years. It's lockdowns, something no one on the stage other than myself was willing to acknowledge. We stopped the global supply chain at its tracks numerous times and then restarted demand again. Supply is not catching up to demand. The best thing we can do right now is to provide the market with some certainty. I will never allow for any lockdowns or any stoppages. I'm also going to restore discipline to government. We're spending way beyond our means, but in terms of affordability, I'm going to repeal the carbon tax on day one. And I will cut income taxes across the board with money saved from equalization payments. I would rather that Canadians spend them instead of provincial governments. We are the Conservative government. We should not be afraid to be talking about cutting taxes.
Mr. Baber, thank you. Mr. Charest.
Well, Roman, on the issue of lockdowns, and I agree, I think one of the things we need to do if we don't want to have the lockdowns and the restrictions we had the last time is change our healthcare system so that we have capacity. That's one of the reasons why Canada had more restrictions than anywhere else in the world, because we don't. So we need to open up this healthcare system so there's more flexibility, more private sector participation in this. On inflation, we need to reduce spending, and we also need to, I think, reduce the income tax load of Canadians. I did that during the Great Recession, and we had a better performance than Ontario, Canada, the United States, or Europe. Lower unemployment and stronger economic growth. Those are the things that we can do to increase the disposable income of people, which is exactly what happened after I was Premier. The disposable income, especially of lower income people, increased substantially because we reduced taxes and controlled spending.
Thanks very much. Mr. Baber, you have 45.
We should never lock down, Mr. Charest. No matter what the circumstances are, we have to acknowledge the toll that this took on people. A mental health pandemic. In Ontario alone, more than 300,000 surgeries were delayed. More than 1 million cancer screenings missed. The whole point is that the toll on our health was considerably greater. Instead, we should have been protecting vulnerable populations, beefing up our resources in congregate settings where 80% of the risk was. We should have been increasing the healthcare capacity we had, but we should acknowledge lockdowns, the effect on our children, the effect on small business. This is something that we cannot escape, and we need to think about and resolve going long term.
Well, and you know, we agree that we need to avoid the lockdowns, and that's why I would change the Canada Health Act. I'd introduce a new hat, because Canada's issue has been capacity. We're the country in the world who's had that problem. Capacity will absorb people. But let me also talk about something else in relation to inflation. Mr. Poilievre's suggestion of firing the governor of the Bank of Canada, his suggestion that of saying that the Bank of Canada is financially illiterate, is irresponsible. It creates doubt. If you're an investor looking at coming to Canada and you hear that kind of a statement coming from a member of the House of Commons, you'd think you're in a third world country. We cannot afford to have any leader who goes out there and deliberately undermines the confidence in institutions. Conservatives do not do that.
Mr. Baber, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the cost of living. The political class is out of touch with Canadians. Prices for produce, for instance, have tripled. This may be one of the greatest challenges that Canadians are facing right now, and we need to do everything possible to make life more affordable for them, not more expensive. Let's repeal the carbon tax. It's increasing the price on everything. Let's cut the income tax, and let's stop devaluing the loonie.
Mr. Charest.
Well, on the carbon tax, I agree with Roman that we need to get out and repeal the Trudeau carbon tax on consumers. And I would be inspired by Alberta. Here in Alberta, since 2002, and you renewed this in 2019, there is a price on carbon for large emitters. And let me point something out here. This is extremely important to get it right. Otherwise, we will not be elected as a political party if we're not credible on this, A. B, we will not get investment unless there is a predictable investment environment on an issue like pricing carbon.
Thank you. That round is finished. Would anybody else like to join in? Mr. Brown, you've still got points, as do you.
We don't have
Mr.
any
Aitchison?
more points.
No, I know you're out. Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, we are now going to move on to the next question. And Mr. Brown, the issue is climate change. Who would you like to debate?
My friend, Dr. Leslyn Lewis.
Okay, Dr. Lewis and Patrick Brown. Mr. Brown, here is the question. In 2015, almost every country in the world, including Canada, signed onto the Paris Accords to fight climate change. To date, not a single G20 country is on track to meet that obligation. Should the Paris Agreement still be the benchmark for Canada in measuring itself by, and if yes, would you commit to meeting the initial Paris Agreement by 2030, and who will bear the cost of getting us there?
So first of all, I should say that the Liberals promised Canada to targets they have no intention, no plan to meet. And that's part of the problem. We need to have a credible environmental plan to actually achieve the targets that Canada commits to. I don't believe in Canada committing to targets that we're unable to commit. And frankly, it is photo op environmentalism. How is it better for the environment to be importing foreign dictator oil into Canada? I find it infuriating that I can't use, when I fill up the pump in Brampton, Ontario, I can't use and be a wealth generator for the Canadian energy sector. And I have to say, the fact that our Prime Minister, this Prime Minister, doesn't understand that is a huge toll on our economy. It's costing Canadians more. Looking at the latest stats, 73,000 barrels from Saudi Arabia, a loss to our economies. He hasn't invested into our energy corridor 14 billion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Brown. Dr. Lewis.
Canada signed on to the Paris Accord. They didn't meet their targets. The US pulled out of the Paris Accord. They met their targets under Donald Trump. The issue is not whether or not we sign on to the Paris Accord. The issue is the resolve to make sure that we leave the future for future generations better environment than what we inherited. There is no partisanship in the environment. We must work together to make sure that we are protecting the environment. The carbon tax doesn't reduce emissions, it just increases revenues. We need to ensure that we adopt technology that will bring down emissions, that will increase conservation, and we have to have a credible environmental plan, and that plan has to have a component of education to change the way we interact with the environment.
Mr. Brown, 45 seconds.
Yes. So you look at China, one of the greatest polluters in the world, 30% of the global emissions. To help with environment, we need to export clean Canadian energy to the world. Since 2014, 18 LNG projects, none approved. At the same time in the US, 7 were built, and now they have 22% of the global market share. So the question about helping countries reliant on coal have clean Canadian energy should be how Canada could help abroad. And right now, we need a Conservative government that can get pipelines built. And the reality is there's some candidates on this stage who would have no chance to get pipelines built because of derogatory remarks they've made about Indigenous Canadians.
Dr. Lewis.
Well, that person certain. I know that Mr. Brown does not refer to me on that one. So it is very important that we look at the entire life cycle of a product. So even when we commit to something like net zero, we should not be virtue signaling to use the environment as virtue signaling. We have to ensure that we look at the entire life cycle of a product. So even if we have a green product, we have to look at the entire production from the start to the finish, such as green energy, such as green cars, electric cars. What is the entire product?
Mr. Brown, you have 30.
So if the premise to get pipelines built is Indigenous collaboration, I'd have to ask Pierre Poilievre the question how he believes he could ever get a single pipeline built in this country when on the heels of Prime Minister Harper's historic residential school apology, he attacked in a disgusting manner Indigenous Canadians, saying they lacked work ethic. Someone who attacks Indigenous partners who we require to build pipelines will never be able to build a single pipeline in this country.
And Dr. Lewis, you have the last 30 seconds.
I just wanted to expand on my comment about the entire life cycle. I'm very concerned with things like electric vehicles, that we do not consider the fact that it starts off in poor countries, in some African countries where children as young as 5 years old are working in cobalt mines. So when we think of protecting the environment, we must think of the entire impact, the entire life cycle.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to say anything? Mr. Charest.
Well, this is a key issue for us. We need to do a lot of things, including carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, blue, green, biofuels, small modular reactors. Alberta, Ontario, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan are working together to develop those technologies. Replace the carbon tax of Mr. Trudeau with something similar to what Alberta is doing for large emitters, and have a credible policy on this in the next campaign, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, our government will not be elected.
Mr. Aitchison.
Thank you. I actually would propose a similar plan to what former Prime Minister Harper had in 2008. It's similar to what Mr. Charest has proposed in this campaign. In fact, I'm making my cabinet right here as we go. I'd make him Minister of the Environment, probably. And I think we need to offer a balanced regulatory approach. I do agree with taxing the large industrial emitters. But I think it's important to point out what's going on right here in Alberta. The innovative work going on in the economy here is something that we need to take an opportunity to sell our products to the world to help countries like China reduce their emissions.
I think that's it. And I see no more paddles being raised. I just want to say that you have been also incredibly disciplined with your time, that we find ourselves in the lovely position of me being able to offer some time back to all of you. Throughout this debate, no doubt you have been dying to say something about what has been discussed here today. So I want to go down the line, and we'll just take it in geographical order here, starting with Dr. Lewis and go down the line. 30 seconds to say anything that you have wanted to say that you didn't get to say so far. 30 seconds each. Dr. Lewis, up to you.
I wanted to add on my point for the environment that we can protect the environment without punishing average Canadians. Every time they're filling up their gas tanks, they're heating their homes, they're putting food on the table, they're being punished with the carbon tax. I would cancel the carbon tax.
Thank you very much. Mr. Faber.
First of all, I really enjoyed today's debate, and of course I appreciate the tone. I think it's okay to have a little bit of fun as we did last time around. And also I think that we should encourage people to speak more freely. A lot of candidates may wish to respond to one another. We should perhaps accommodate such opportunity. And finally, if I may, in the 10 seconds they'll give me, I think that we should not be afraid to stand for what we believe is the Conservative Party. And unfortunately, I'm out of time.
You're out of time. Mr. Charest.
I look forward to working with everyone on stage here, and Mr. Aitchison, I appreciate the invitation. I want to talk about resources and point something out here about Canada. We have a knowledge-based economy, but a good part of our exports are resources. Whether it's mining, oil, gas, whether it's pipelines, we need to stand up for the development of our resource industry. And we need a prime minister who's actually going to say this is a good idea. We can do this and transition to zero emissions in 2050. It is possible to do it, and only the Conservative Party of Canada has the ability to offer that leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Mr. Aitchison, what have you been dying to say?
Well, I guess I really think it's important to say that as Conservatives, we need to have the courage of our convictions to defend our values and our principles. Our values and principles as Conservatives are timeless. And if we stick to those, and if we offer a principled, consistent message to Canadians, we can form the next government.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brown.
I believe in technology, not taxes. In Brampton will be the first big city in Canada to have a fully electrified transit fleet, clean, green, and no emissions. I should also say, we need to have a conversation about a carbon tariff at the border. The fact that some candidates on the stage are okay to allow India and China to flood the market where they have no environmental standards, they have no labor standards, and compete with Canadian goods is wrong. We need to create a Canadian advantage and protect against product being dumped with no environmental cost.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poilievre.
The biggest issue I've heard about that people haven't talked about today is housing. Our 32, 33-year-old people living in their parents' basements. We have the fewest houses in Canada per capita in the G7. At the same time, our central bank has been printing money to inflate prices. The solution is, of course, to fire the gatekeepers. I've already announced that I will fire the governor of the central bank to get inflation under control, but I will also tie infrastructure dollars for cities to the number of houses they allow to get built by removing the red tape and allowing builders to build homes for our young people to live in.
Thank you very much. We are now going to the final section of the debate. And once again, all the candidates have been advised in advance of this. And it is simply we started the debate with the question, what is my vision for Canada is, ... This question is, why should I be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, ... 45 seconds to each of you to answer that question. And we are going to start with Scott Aitchison.
I believe it's 30 seconds, is it not?
We've increased it to 45.
Really?
Yeah.
I got my 45 back. We must welcome more people to our party if we are to succeed, but we cannot do it with angry rhetoric and attacks on each other. Leaders always engage, empower, and inspire the team around them. As leader, I will bring Conservatives together, and we will earn the trust of all Canadians to govern again. I know our best days lie ahead. With our team focused on all that unites us, we will fulfill the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And if you seek a Conservative government focused on making life more affordable, join me. Join me at votescott.ca. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aitchison. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Tom. I want to be leader of the Conservative Party of Canada because we need a leader who can defeat Justin Trudeau, not just yell at him. We need to expand our party with new members, new supporters, new volunteers, and most importantly, new voters. But it'll never happen if we choose a leader who repels voters and supports failed, election-losing policies that trample over the religious freedom of Canadians. I won in the GTA by proving to voters who have traditionally not supported the Conservative Party that their values are our values, Conservative values. With your support, we can do that on a national scale from coast to coast to coast and win.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. We are now going to Dr. Lewis. 45 seconds.
Are we not doing Mr. Poilievre? No? Oh, me? Okay.
We drew for these slots, and you drew number 3, so
thank you.
There you go.
Canadians are tired of legacy politicians that will say anything to get elected. Wokeism and cancel culture are robbing people of their voices. Our Charter of Rights needs to be defended. As your leader, I pledge to work tirelessly to heal our institutions and win back the trust of Canadians. But I can't do it alone. I hope you will join this movement to restore our declining democracy and return prosperity to Canada, because only then will we remain glorious and free.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. And Mr. Charest.
Thank you, Tom. There are millions of Canadians who are orphans in this country right now. They're political orphans, and they are looking for a national alternative and a conservative alternative. We need to be that party. I want to lead that party. I want to unite the party, and I want to offer a national vision, not based on anger, not based on tearing down institutions, but on building our country. We are the most privileged citizens in the world. We won the lottery of citizenship. We should be living up to that aspiration, passing on to our children the country that we received from our parents. It is your responsibility and mine to do that. And as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, I will give you a national majority government.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Mr. Poilievre.
People feel like they've lost control of their lives. Elderly people who have to choose between heating and eating. Single moms who can no longer afford sporting for their kids. Full of grown adults stuck in their parents' basement, not able to start a family or build home equity for the future. Inflation out of control at a 30-year high, and a government that instead of hearing these concerns tries to censor them by cracking down on the population. I'm running for Prime Minister to put you back in control of your life by making Canada the freest nation on earth, by removing the gatekeepers so that we can build more homes for our young people, unleash opportunity for our energy workers, reduce our energy costs so everyone can go where they want and heat their home. Make this the country that is the freest on earth so you can take back control of your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. And final word goes to Roman Baber.
Thank you. My name is Roman Baber. I was born in a communist regime, and I'm very scared for what is happening to Canada's democracy. And I'm running to become Prime Minister so I can defend Canada's democracy. With me, what you hear is what you get. For the last 2 years, I've been staying here trying to defend Canadians because I'm not afraid to say what I believe. I'm not afraid of cancel culture or the left-wing lockdown mob. I love Canada and I love Canadians. And you can always count on me to defend you and your family. No matter how hard it gets, you will always know where I stand. I ask that you become eligible to vote at joinroman.ca and that you rank me #1. Thank you so much for welcoming all of us tonight.
Thank you, candidates, very much. It was a challenging format, but I think that we did well. I just want everybody to know that you will all be, we're getting the band back together again on May 25th in Laval, Quebec for the French debate. You can all tune into that as well. On behalf of myself, I just want to thank all of you for a superb debate tonight, an exchange of ideas. As I said, good, passionate debate is the lifeblood of good democracy. Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. That is tonight's debate.
Well, that was the last leadership debate. I don't know about you guys, but I think I'd rather watch the one that Candice Malcolm and Jamil Giovanni hosted for the next 10 hours and watch another half hour of that one. So the first,
I agree.
Yeah, the first topic to discuss with the debate should never be the format, but I think we'd be remiss to jump over that. So let's start with that. I'm Harley Sims, senior editor with True North. We're joined by Elie Cantin-Nantel, who's one of our reporters, and Harrison Faulkner, producer and a reporter as well. Elie, let's start with you. Let's talk about this format. Go.
Well, I've seen a few debates since getting interested in politics, and I do have to say that it was probably the worst that I've seen in terms of this format. I thought the format wasn't very good. It was quite subpar. The rules, like the no clapping, that didn't make a lot of sense. I feel as part of a democracy, like clapping and seeing people agreeing with policies is important. The time they had to answer was also way too short. Like people have to have time to express their ideas. If politics is about 15-second pitches, and I think that's a problem that needs to be addressed. We need to have longer conversations about policy ideas, not just 15 seconds clips that maybe will look good on a Facebook post.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need more than 15 seconds to discuss the fundamental issues of our country and our democracy. Absolutely. Harrison, what do you think?
Well, where do you start, Harley? It was really quite embarrassing, I think, for people who take these sorts of things very seriously. Canadians who want to actually hear who the potential next leader of our country is and what they have to say. And the way that it was moderated, the way that it was formatted was horrendous. It's so bad, in fact, that the moderator, who I thought was incredibly poor, couldn't even keep up with his own rules. I mean, he had to ask the candidates on stage what the rules were so he could follow along himself. And I think one thing that just jumped out at me was, on top of the fact that obviously most Conservative Party members were let down by that debate, they didn't even touch on housing, which I think is a key issue in this entire campaign. And also the front runner didn't get to speak for the last 45 minutes of the debate because the way the format worked out, he had something to say. He had something to challenge the person who I think most would agree that is in second place, Jean Charest. That's Pierre Poilievre. He went back and forth with Jean Charest, and then he lost the rest of his chance to speak. So he couldn't even speak for the last 45 minutes of the debate, and I think it was a huge waste.
Yeah, I was watching it, and I couldn't understand why Pierre Poilievre wasn't speaking towards the end, and then I had to be reminded he'd run out of paddle points because people in the audience had cheered him, and he was personally punished for that. So I think you're right, Elie. Like, what is this? Is this a democracy or dictatorship? I think you're right on with that. But let's get past that. I mean, the format's taken up enough of our time. So, how do you think the performances went? They didn't have a lot of time to go face to face with things. I think the moderator Tom Clark kind of steered them in the directions he wanted. But as far as their ability to debate ideas, how do you think that went, Elie?
Well, I do have to say I wasn't as impressed as I thought I would be with certain candidates. I mean, of course, I think just like the last debate, the one that really stands out is Roman Baber, and it's because of his ideas. Roman Baber has very kind of well thought through ideas. He has said the same thing since when he came out against the lockdowns. I mean, I want to remind everybody that Roman Baber was kicked out of the PC Doug Ford's caucus when he opposed his lockdowns, and then stood in the legislature and fought for the reopening of Ontario, fought for unvaccinated people that wanted to lose their jobs. Meanwhile, I don't personally recall Pierre Poilievre saying anything while O'Toole was clamping down on the Civil Liberties Caucus that MPs like Marilyn Gladue tried to form. So I think, again, Roman came off as very genuine. I will also give a bit of credit to Jean Charest. While I don't agree with some of his policies, for someone his age, he is very charismatic. He's very passionate, and for also somebody who is not Anglophone, he's like me, he's French Canadian. He expressed himself, I thought, very well tonight.
I agree. I think Baber came out on top, actually. Just he didn't miss any opportunities to get some punches in. He stood up for the Freedom Convoy, pointed out everything had been debunked. He didn't seem afraid to make a stand for anything. So I definitely agree with you there. Harrison, how do you think the candidates did? Who do you think came out on top, and who do you think came out near the bottom?
Yeah, well, it's a shame because I do hold Leslyn Lewis in high regard. I do think that she is an important figure in the Conservative Party, but I was disappointed by her debate performance tonight. I thought that it was a little rocky and that she didn't sound very confident in what she had to say. Now, in regards to Roman Baber's performance, as we talked about in the pre-show, Roman Baber is clearly the breakaway surprise of this campaign. And even on the issues where you don't expect him to perhaps put forward the best policy, I thought, for example, on the northern issues and his ideas for developing the North, I was actually quite surprised to hear his take on it. And it appears to me that, as Elie said, He's got all of the key issues that he was asked on about today well thought through. He's deeply thought about these issues and has come forward. Now, I also think that Patrick Brown didn't shake up the debate as much as I think people were expecting him to, given that he was not at the first debate and the way that his campaign has sort of taken the direction it has. I think a lot of people were expecting him to throw some more shots at some of the candidates. Obviously, he went after Pierre quite strong, but I also just think that it was a missed opportunity because of the format. We weren't able to hear a really good exchange between Patrick Brown and Pierre Poilievre. The only good exchange we got was between Jean Charest and Pierre Poilievre, and Pierre was the only person to land a zinger, which I think is going to be the lasting clip of the debate.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I guess I would go to what stood out. I mean, it's tough to tweeze anything really, scintillating out of that debate. One thing that stood out for me, though, where Pierre Poilievre really stood out, was when he was answering the question about blocking critical infrastructure. And he actually took issue with the question, which I thought was great. He said, you guys, you're grouping these all into one thing. You're calling them all blockades. You're calling the Freedom Convoy blockade the same thing as the attacks on LNG sites in northern BC. And, that's not right. And you in the legacy media keep pretending it's all the same thing. That for me stood out. I know there were some other things, but Elie, what were some moments in that debate that actually stood out for you that way?
Well, Harley, I think I agree with you that definitely stood out. I mean, the moderator called the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa an occupation, which is personally, as somebody who covered it, not how I refer to the Freedom Convoy. I thought it was a peaceful protest. When it comes to things that stood out, there's that moment. I think too the whole exchange on the crypto and the Bitcoin was pretty interesting. And when Roman said why do we have career politicians giving us investment advice, I thought that was a pretty fair point. But again, I do have to kind of go back to the format. What really stood out to me were these questions about what book people read or what music they listen to. I kind of almost had to like pinch myself, like, is this for real? Because there's so many pressing issues going on in Canadian society right now. And things like that stood out because to me, this downplayed the seriousness of Canadian democracy.
Yeah. Not only what are you reading, what are you binge watching? You're right. I couldn't believe this. There are people who have committed suicide due to the government response to the pandemic and the effects it's had on them. Kids have lost, 2 years of schooling. Their grades have plummeted. Diseases of despair. This is not something to have fun with. So I completely agree with you there. Harrison, what stood out for you?
Well, I mean, the unfortunate reality is that Elie is right. The fact that the moderator, the organizers of this debate, which was the Conservative Party, which I think is something that I think a lot of Conservative members should take issue with, they tried to get the candidates to explain the biggest threat to Canada and to Canadians in 15 seconds. And to me, as you said, Harley, it makes a mockery of the suffering, the real suffering that Canadians have had to go through unnecessarily, I would say, throughout the past few years. It makes a mockery of the hard work that a lot of people are trying to do to help the country get on the right path. It's really disappointing because we know from watching the Canada Strong and Free Network debate moderated by Candice Malcolm and Jamil Jivani, we know exactly. Well, first of all, we knew we were going to get before that, which was going to be a good debate on the issues that allows the candidates to have a legitimate back and forth in a conversation. And we know that's what we're going to get with the independent press gallery debate. But the candidates have to go through another one of these party-led debates, this time in French. And based off of this performance, I'm afraid, unless it might be people like you, Elie, but I don't know how many people are going to tune into the French language debate.
I think based on the last two French debates of the last two leadership races, the French debates tend to have a reputation for not being of quality. I'm not sure what the French level of all the candidates are. I know that some of them who struggled last time, like Leslyn Lewis, has been improving her French, but I will just say I do not look forward to watching French debates in the leadership race because to see people butcher your maiden language is somewhat disappointing. People were running for prime minister at least. And
Your
if
mother
somebody's learning
tongue.
French,
Your
that's
mother
great.
tongue.
But when you want to be prime minister and you can't even speak one of our official languages, I think that personally that kind of disqualifies you.
Well, as far as the book question go, I don't think you can go too wrong with Jordan Peterson. I just wonder why he took so long to read it. That book's been out for a while now. But I mean, let's face it. People who are watching True North's coverage of this, they know what's going on here. So why don't we just get right down to it and talk about the issues that were brought up for debate? I mean, we got Candice and Jamil hosted a great debate at the Strong and Free conference. They got into the issues of civil liberties and cost of living, and these are the issues that the Conservative leadership candidates want to talk about themselves because they matter, and we know they matter. So give me an example of some of the issues that they were steered to talk about that kind of expose the kind of I guess the line of thinking of the moderator, and why we should probably look to better opportunities to understand their positions in the future.
Well, I think right off the bat, the very first question of the debate, which is when everyone's paying attention, could have been about these issues that conservatives really care about, that they really want to know about. But instead, it was an odd a question about whether they would impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which I think no one except for Patrick Brown disagreed with. Everyone was in agreement on that. I think most people would be that would be an unnecessary maneuver. Again, it shows you that I honestly believe part of me wants to think that they chose questions that conservative voters frankly weren't interested in, and they forced the candidates to avoid getting into the issues that they care about. And I can't understand why, because to lead the debate off with a question about whether they would impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, when we've just spent the last 10 minutes or so explaining exactly what the issues Canadians are facing are, shows to you, Harley, that they never had any real intention of giving conservative voters what they wanted, a debate on the serious problems that are facing Canadians. I think the only time that anyone veered into it, Pierre Poilievre veered into, just briefly, the central bank digital currencies and the digital encroachment on the lives of Canadians. That could have led to a great conversation about some of the issues that a lot of people are worried about, digital ID, things like this, giving Canadians their own sovereignty back. But instead, of course, it just goes back to Paris climate targets and Ukraine no-fly zones. It was a huge disappointment.
Elie, you put out a good story today. You went to a parliamentary press conference and you asked a Liberal minister about whether or not they would let unvaccinated U.S. women into Canada to have abortions, because, of course, the Trudeau government declared that if the Roe v. Wade is overturned, they would welcome American women up here to have their abortions. So you asked them, what about unvaccinated women? What about women from marginalized communities who are disproportionately access abortion services? I mean, these are all gotcha issues. I mean, what do you think? What do you think is the reason that they keep bringing this issue up and throwing it in conservatives' lap? So when does it end? What's the point?
Well, I think as somebody who is personally pro-life, I always kind of find it disappointing the lack of courage to take on this issue head on. I mean, I believe that you could be pro-life and promise to reduce abortion in Canada without banning abortions, because there's a lot of abortions that are taking place due to economic factors or social factors that I think the government could try to improve. The Liberals have created such a stigma around this issue where, I mean, we saw it Andrew Scheer. Andrew Scheer said that he would not bring in any abortion regulation. He said he was personally pro-life, but he made it very clear that he would not do that. And they basically made it seem as you were not allowed to even be personally pro-life. So I think Liberals are taking advantage of conservatives here, because a lot of conservative leaders lack conviction. And even, I will give some criticism to Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre is very outspoken on a lot of issues. He talks about a lot of issues, just says it like it is. But when it comes to this issue, he never said, I am pro-choice. He said, I support free choice, or I will not reopen. But Jean Charest tried to make him say, I am pro-choice, and he couldn't. Pierre Poilievre had a pro-life voting record for many years as an MP. I have friends who go to the same Catholic church as him. Suddenly he says he's pro-choice. To me, this is, again, he is falling into this trap. He's got to be honest with people where he stands. And I think politicians should be able to state their personal conviction. It comes off as more genuine to say, look, I'm pro-life, but I do not want to divide this country at a time where it's already divided and bring in more polarizing policies like what's going on in the United States. We will focus on Canadians and improving life.
I think they like asking us these questions because they like to watch conservatives squirm. It's the same thing with the carbon taxes. We live out here in BC. They keep raising the taxes. Carbon keeps rates keep going up. It's not working, right? But they want to see people say the right things. They put the crosshairs on them. I'm just getting notice that we're about ready to head over to the scrums. Our colleague Andrew Lawton will be asking the candidates questions. I'm going to see if we're about ready to go there. Not quite yet. Harrison.
Yeah, I'll just say, I'll just say that Elie was bringing up a point, and you, Harley, touched on it about making conservatives struggle in front of the camera, forcing conservatives into the liberal debate. Instead of setting the debate ourselves, very few conservatives have the courage and the fortitude to stand on the principles that they believe in. Instead, they'd much prefer just to basically fall in line with the legacy media, fall in line with the liberals, and it's very obvious. There was nobody on the stage. Leslyn Lewis is very open and admits her pro-life stance, but then when it comes down to defending it with strength, no one can really defend it with strength. And it's an example of conservatives constantly losing the cultural battle of setting the debate and setting the tone. Until such time as conservatives can regain the cultural ground and set our own debate and set our own tone, we're going to forever be in the shadow of the liberals, and we're going to dance to their tune just like they want us to.
Yeah, that's very well said. I agree. That's very well said. I guess from there, I think I would ask which issues were completely avoided in this. I never heard things like globalist organizations brought up. I mean, I know the legacy media likes to call it all conspiracy theories. But what else? What were some issues that were not brought up at all that you think were things that the conservative audiences really wanted to hear about? Elie?
Well, I mean, this debate was taking place in Western Canada. I worked in Western Canada for a year last year, and I saw a great deep alienation. I personally did not see a discussion about this. I wish they would have talked more about Western issues. People in the West have lost complete hope and faith in Ottawa and in Eastern Canadian institutions, and it's a big problem. I didn't realize how serious it was until I flew to Alberta and stepped foot on the ground.
Sorry, Elie. It's I like nothing more than seeing a Quebecer stick up for the West, but I think we're up. Scott Aitchison is up, and we're going to throw to Andrew Lawton. Thanks a lot.
Sounds good.
In French and English.
Okay.
How can conservatives win if they don't have an environmental plan, if their members don't vote for a motion recognizing climate change?
Well, I think you're referring actually to an event that occurred during our last convention, and the situation is a little more different than what you've just described. In fact, what that motion did was amend a motion that was kind of poorly worded, that does in fact acknowledge climate change exists, and the amendment itself was poorly worded. So in our materials and in our policy documents, we do in fact acknowledge that climate change does exist. It is a reality, and I think you heard tonight some great ideas about how we can move forward with a credible climate change plan that doesn't actually punish the most vulnerable in our society.
But how can Conservatives win on the environmental plan if those members are not backing up any kind of plan on climate change? And if you can also try to answer in French, please.
Well, I think they do, in fact, agree that climate change is a reality, and it already is in our policy documents, that it is something that exists and that we need to address it. So, and sorry, and I'm not going to be able to answer that in French.
Is it one or two?
We're just going.
Hi, Mr. Aitchison. Celine Gallus for Rebel News. The Liberals have imposed a backdoor gun registry through an order in Council which changes regulations to require retailers and sellers to collect data on purchasers. New rules come into force May 18th. Will you commit to repealing these?
I will. Canada has among the most regulated firearms industry in the world. The problem that we have in this country is the issue of illegal guns coming across our border and getting into the hands of gangs. That's a much more difficult challenge to deal with. And you see the Liberals time and again using firearms and legal law-abiding firearms owners in this country as a whipping tool to try to lather up their base and generate votes while not dealing with the real issues. It's the wrong approach for Canada. What we need to do is address the real problem, not demonize law-abiding firearms owners.
Time.
My pleasure. We're good? Great. Thanks very much.
Good evening, Andrew Lawton, True North. You've been unequivocally against vaccine mandates. That obviously includes mandates for public sector workers. If you were Prime Minister, would you rehire anyone who was fired because of vaccine mandates? And if so, would you give them retroactive pay for time they missed?
So 100% I would mandate, I try to pass similar legislation in Ontario, the Jobs and Jabs Act, that would retroactively protect workers. We have to think about how we're going to go about that. We certainly want to try and put them in the position that they would have otherwise been. I'm not sure if we're going to do that through EI. I'm also not sure how we're going to go about that when it comes to those that are not unionized. Those that are unionized should be a lot easier. Those that are not unionized, going to have to give that some thought. But I think that it's inhumane to make someone choose between their ability to put food on the table and their personal healthcare choice. We've got to do right by all Canadians.
As a follow-up, there are a number of legal challenges against the Emergencies Act, vaccine passports, vaccine mandates. A lot of these are going to take years and years to litigate. They could span into another government. What directive would you give on these legal challenges if you were Prime Minister?
So I know what I would do, which is I would outlaw all mandates and passports, and those that are beyond the reach of the federal government, I would be very, very hard on the provinces that allow for any semblance of that in place. I will not permit 21st century segregation in Canada.
Sydney Fizzard with Rebel News. Former Conservative Party Heritage critic MP Alan Ray's actually pushed for more censorship from the government.
Sorry, I can't hear you, sir.
Sorry. Former Conservative Party Heritage critic MP Alan Ray's actually pushed for more censorship from the government, calling out the Falun Gong-founded Epoch Times by name, calling it a conspiracy site. Now the party opposes Trudeau's call to regulate the internet. What changed, and why didn't you speak sooner?
I apologize, I'm having difficulties hearing you, but I think I understand the general tone of your question. Look, I think that there is no freedom of speech in Canada without a free and independent media. And that means that we need to stop subsidizing mainstream media, we need to stop the bailouts, we need to defund the CBC, and also we should not having some sort of litmus test by government bureaucrats saying who's a journalist and who's not a journalist. I think that independent media provides a valuable perspective, and it should be encouraged.
Hello, Rachel Manuel with the Western Standard. Mr. Baber, you had a news release today about ending equalization payments. I'm wondering how you think this will bode with voters in central and eastern Canada.
Yeah, I think it's time to end dependency on equalization. Equalization is basically redistribution, and I'm against redistribution. And look, I'm not satisfied that any province can come to the table and say that they're unable to provide an equal, a comparable level of services given what their taxation now is at this time. And should there not be able to be, I would like to work with them in terms of enabling them and empowering them. And that begins with unleashing their natural resources. I would propose that we work together to make our nation the natural resources superpower that we ought to be.
Sure. You've been speaking a lot about equalization payments and making Canada a natural resource superpower. I'm wondering, you're clearly appealing to the West here. I'm wondering if you think your focus on Western issues will make other candidates really take Alberta seriously and bring those issues to the forefront for them as well.
Look, of course we appreciate regional disparity and we appreciate the effect of equalization on various provinces, but I believe that my plan to empower our entire country to develop our natural resources stems beyond the Western provinces. We see Newfoundland, for instance, that used to be a have-not province that no longer receives equalization. Brian Higgins, the Premier of New Brunswick, a couple of years ago came out against equalization. And so I think that we can accomplish this coast to coast. We can unite behind the fact that we should make ourselves more competitive and encourage economic opportunity rather than dependency. Thank you very much, everyone.
Mr. Baber? Hi. I got one for you. The same as for Mr. Aitchison. I'm Audrey with French CBC. How do you think that Conservatives can win on the environmental aspect if a majority of their members vote against a motion recognizing climate change?
Look, I think it's important that we recognize what the membership thinks, but at the same time, I think that we need to have a pragmatic approach to the environment. I do not believe that taxing Sally $10 at the gas pump is going to move climate change. And I think that making life more affordable for Canadians is not something that they would seek to do at this time. I think that we need to be clear about where we stand on this, and I'm comfortable taking it to the general election. Thank you.
Okay. Up there, okay.
I was going to ask the same thing, if everyone can just look forward, even though we're the ones asking the questions. I'm curious for your thoughts on the format of this debate. It was a bit unique, and in some cases, there was only 15, 30, 45 seconds to answer questions. In your opinion, was that enough, or did you feel sort of handcuffed, like you weren't able to fully get your thoughts across?
Well, I guess you never have enough time to get in everything you want to say, but I thought we were able to cover a lot of topics, so it was a fun night, and appreciated the opportunity to have a feisty discussion tonight.
Sheila Gunn-Reid, Rebel News. You have given some confusing statements around moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Will you commit to moving the Canadian embassy to the Israeli capital of Jerusalem?
No, I will not move the embassy. I support the position that was articulated under Stephen Harper's government, which was not to move the government, as it would make the peace process more difficult.
And a second question, you have said that now is not the right time to raise the carbon tax. However, you have been a proponent of the carbon tax. So when then would be the right time to raise the carbon tax?
So I don't support raising the carbon tax, period. And I believe that we should respect provincial jurisdiction. What I would say is I think there needs to be a serious conversation about carbon tariffs at the border, given the fact that we continue to see product dumped in Canada from China and India that competes with Canadian goods, and frankly, product that doesn't have the same environmental or labour standards.
Hi, Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. You're going after Mr. Poilievre for policies that he's actually not talking about. The 2015 campaign was a long time ago. He's not talking about things like a niqab ban. He apologized for the comment he made about the residential school settlement. Why are you bringing this up, and why do you think Conservatives today want to be reminded of this?
Well, frankly, I don't believe Mr. Poilievre is electable, particularly in suburban Canada. And these policies, these discriminatory policies, still haunt the party. Look at the results in the last 3 federal elections in suburban Canada. We've been blown out for policies that Pierre Poilievre refuses to disavow. And some more recently, the vote where he refused to condemn hate against Muslims and Islamophobia, that was only a few years ago. And so, unfortunately, for Mr. Poilievre, his voting record and his past make it very difficult for him to be a champion of religious freedom, which I believe is important if you're going to make breakthroughs in suburban Canada.
As a follow-up, it seems that your campaign, and correct me if I'm wrong, is so focused on bringing in new members, you're not necessarily talking to the grassroots. You skipped out on the Manning conference last week. It didn't seem that necessarily your message was resonating that much with people in this room. If you become the leader, how do you expect to be able to stay in the role when you have so few support within caucus and within the existing membership?
So first of all, I'd say we're very encouraged by the support in the existing caucus and also within the existing membership. We're going to do just fine amongst existing members, but my point is we need to grow the tent if we're going to win. I'm not interested in a 4th losing election. I want to make sure, and I'm laser focused on this, that we're electable in suburban Canada, electable in the corners of the country where we've lost. And to do that, we need to grow the size of our party, to make sure our party reflects the beautiful mosaic of the country. You know, I've gone into riding associations in seats where we have 100 members. There's no chance you can win a seat when you have no connectivity with the communities in that riding. And so that's what I plan to change, to make sure we have the type of infrastructure that I developed provincially in the 905, where, frankly, the PCs were able to sweep because we built real meaningful relationships and infrastructure in ridings that had a strong Liberal foothold.
Bonjour, M. Brown, Audrey Neveu de Radio-Canada. Comment est-ce que vous croyez que le Parti conservateur peut gagner sur le plan environnemental si une majorité de ses membres vote contre une motion qui reconnaît l'existence des changements climatiques?
Je pense que c'est important d'avoir un plan de politique qui comprend qu'il y a une crise d'abordabilité dans notre pays, mais en même temps appuyer les enjeux où nous pouvons combattre le changement climatique. J'ai à Brampton, avec notre système de transport, j'ai un record où je fais ça. Et c'est sauf les nouveaux impôts, c'est avec les nouvelles technologies.
Mais en tant que chef du Parti conservateur, est-ce que vous metteriez de l'avant une plateforme plus forte pour la lutte contre les changements climatiques?
Je pense que tu peux faire le deux. Maintenant, avec les libéraux, ils parlent beaucoup avec le changement climatique, mais chaque fois quand il y a des bouts, il manque les bouts. Je pense que c'est important d'avoir un parti conservateur où nous appuyons les deux dossiers, les deux enjeux, l'abordabilité et en même temps de combattre le changement climatique.
That's time.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Andrew Lawton, True North. Earlier today, the Correctional Service of Canada confirmed its policy that biologically male inmates can be reassigned to women's prisons based on preference alone. I was wondering what you think about that policy and if you would reverse that as Prime Minister.
Well, I think it's very important that people, whatever their gender, has a certain level of comfort in certain situations. I also think that there are situations where biological females may feel a sense of vulnerability because of the situations that they may have been in, for example, if they were sexually assaulted by a male, etc. And so we have to make sure that we find compassionate ways to accommodate the diversity of individuals that will find themselves in a facility, whether it is a shelter or whether it is a correctional facility.
You were the only candidate tonight on a question about abortion to say that you were pro-life. Do you have confidence that if any one of your opponents on this stage were the leader of the Conservative Party, that you would have a place and have the latitude to express your values as a Conservative MP?
Well, I would hope that everyone that's speaking about how important freedom is would honor that. And I think it's very important that in a free and democratic society that MPs are not forced to vote against their conscience. And so I'm confident that the individuals on the stage, I'm confident and I'm hoping sincerely that because they believe in our charter, they believe in freedom, that they will also believe in the right to have free votes.
Adam Sos here for Rebel News. The Allen inquiry found that foreign funding for Canadian-based environmental initiatives totaled $1.28 billion from 2003 to 2019, most of it largely untraceable, and a substantial amount of it was dedicated to blocking Alberta oil and gas development. Do you see this as a problem, and if so, what will you do to change it?
Absolutely. I think it's important that we have the courage and conviction to develop our natural resources, even in the face of foreign interference. And where we can detect that foreign interference does exist and that it's preventing us from realizing our potential, building pipelines, developing our natural resources, getting our product to market, offsetting foreign dictator oil, we should definitely ensure that those individuals and those organizations are stamped out and comply with our laws, which means not blocking critical infrastructures.
Hello, Wyatt Claypool from the National Telegraph. I just wanted to ask what your opinion is on, because a lot of the times the media and other candidates and just other people in general make you try to justify your pro-life positions, whereas nobody has to justify their opposition to abortion. And I'm wondering what you feel about the current status of the debate, where people never have to come out and explain why they're okay with late-term and sex-selective abortion, and whether or not you think you're getting fair treatment on the issue.
I think that's a very good question. The abortion issue is so polarizing, and I think it's very important that we get to the point where we could talk about what it is that we agree on. The media, I believe, is just genuinely curious with someone who has the conviction to come out and say, yes, I'm pro-life. And because of cancelled culture, many people are afraid to say what they stand for. I think that it's important to recognize that whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, that we can have conversations and we can find things that we agree on. And because it's such a polarizing issue, it's important that we start by looking at what it is that we agree on.
Hi, Ms. Lewis, Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. Pierre Poilievre said he would fire the Bank of Canada governor. Do you agree with him? Do you support? Would you do the same?
I'm very concerned about any speech on behalf of an elected official that undermines credibility in our economic system. And I don't agree that members of Parliament should be meddling in the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada has long-term plans. In Parliament, their budgets are of a short-term nature. I respect the division of powers there. I respect the Bank of Canada having the capacity and their officials having the capacity to make long-term projections that are not based on partisanship.
That's time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Lewis, can I ask a question? Same as the others.
Yeah, it was 5 minutes. They're each doing 5, sorry.
Oh, I would have asked the same question as the others. Yeah.
I think he's just making his way up.
Hello.
Bonjour, Monsieur Charest. Oh, not working? Okay.
Là, j'entends une voix, mais je vous vois pas, là.
Bonjour, à votre droite. Mais vous pouvez regarder par en avant, ça va être mieux. Audrey
Ah, vous
Neveu,
êtes là,
bonjour. Audrey Neveu de Radio-Canada. Si vous pouvez regarder après vers la caméra, ça aidera tous les réseaux de télévision.
Vous savez, le son est très mauvais dans cette salle-là. Hein? Et le son était mauvais ce soir. Alors, ça n'a pas aidé, mais allez-y. Alors, vous voulez que je regarde votre caméra, mais c'est elle où, votre caméra?
Monsieur Charest, comment...
Sorry, just the pool camera's right down the middle.
D'accord. OK, I got it.
That's fine. Monsieur Charest, comment est-ce que vous croyez que les conservateurs peuvent gagner sur le plan environnemental si une majorité de membres vote contre une motion qui reconnaît l'existence des changements climatiques?
Bien, la course au leadership, c'est un choix. Et justement, c'est l'occasion de débattre de ces questions-là. Et le prochain chef aura, lui, sur la base du choix qui sera fait, le mandat de procéder avec les politiques que lui ou elle propose.
Et quel sera votre plan là-dessus?
Bien, moi, je l'ai rendu public, mon plan. Mon plan, je l'ai rendu public. Ça inclut le captage de carbone, ça inclut l'hydrogène bleu, vert, ça inclut les petites centrales nucléaires, les grandes centrales nucléaires, ça inclut les biogaz, ça inclut les renouvelables. Alors, il faut une approche globale, une approche qui nous permet d'arriver à des vrais résultats. Et là-dessus, moi, je me débarrasse de la taxe sur le carbone de M. Trudeau. On met en place une taxe sur les grands émetteurs, ce qui est très constant avec ce qu'on a fait au Québec, avec le système de permis échangeables, avec la Californie d'une part, et d'autre part, avec ce qui se fait en Alberta. Et troisièmement, même le commissaire à l'environnement, le lendemain, on a rendu public notre politique à nous, disait que la taxe de M. Trudeau faisait mal aux PME et aux gens qui étaient moins fortunés. Alors, tout ça est constant.
Bill Fortier, CTV National News. Sir, you have more debate experience than anybody else up on the stage. I'm curious what you thought of this format in terms of how short the answers were. Did you have time to fully get your thoughts out? And also, you know, the lack of crossfire. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just wondering what you think.
You know, every time there's debate, people look for formats that is going to give a balance between equal time, fair time in a debate. And it was an unusual format. I mean, none of us expected the questions that were a more personal level. So you do your best when you're on the stage to try to convey what it is that you want to propose. I come into these debates trying to do that every time and say, at the end of the evening, I'd like folks to, you know, come away and say, well, this is what Mr. Charest would do if he becomes the leader. And that's what I believe in. But I did see something tonight that I have never, ever seen in a debate in my lifetime. Never, ever have I seen someone flip-flop on stage on something like abortion. I mean, Mr. Poilievre to flip-flop in one answer to the other is unprecedented on an issue like that. I've never seen that happen before. I think that says a lot about him. So, prochain.
Mr. Chair, Adam Sos from Rebel News. I know this is a question you've been asked a number of times, and I completely respect and appreciate your sentiment that no one should have to apologize for work that they have done in the past. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity to address the fact that Huawei was developing AI technology to enforce the CCP social credit system and to identify Uyghurs for internment. In light of this, do you have any apprehension or criticism of the party of the company aside from the work that you yourself were doing?
All the work that I have done in my lifetime has always been aligned with the interest of Canada. Private, public sector, period. It's that simple. And for Huawei, I would ban Huawei. I'm very clear on that. And just to remind you how things evolved, it was a Conservative government that brought Huawei into Canada. a Conservative government of which Mr. Poilievre was a member of. I mean, Huawei was actually a sponsor on Hockey Night in Canada. So my position is very clear. Thank you.
Good evening, Andrew Lawton, True North. You've said that the convoy is an illegal blockade. Obviously, you've been very open about your position and you've distanced yourself from other candidates. Could you, in good conscience, vote for a candidate in your local riding that supported the convoy, given the comments you've made about how Mr. Poilievre's support for the Freedom Convoy is, in your words, disqualifying?
Well, and Andrew, I'm glad you asked the question, because this whole story has parts to it. First part is, people do have a right to protest. There should be no doubt in anyone's mind about that. A peaceful protest is part of democracy, and if someone knows about that, because I've been on the other side of it in my lifetime, it's me. And I've never ever questioned that. So that's the first part. Second part, you know, the whole mess was very much on Mr. Trudeau. I mean, how come this happened? I mean, and by the way, when you return to that whole story, it's just, I mean, it was incredible. How could the situation degenerate the way it did? It's now, that being said, that is not an excuse for those who go out there and support an illegal blockade. And when I'm saying that, I am not at all criticizing truckers and people who have their legitimate jobs, to who we owe a lot, because during this whole COVID period, they stepped up and they did their job. And they deserve nothing less than our very deep respect and gratitude. But illegal blockades at borders or anywhere else, especially borders, we lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Folks in the automotive industry questioned whether they should be investing in Canada. The American president had to call up Mr. Trudeau to ask him whether he needed an American intervention to clean up a blockade in Canada. That's embarrassing for us. My point is simple. If you have the privilege of being a member of Parliament, you make laws, you change laws, you can't treat the laws of the land like a buffet table from which you choose what's popular or unpopular. And sometimes you have to resist, that's leadership, what may be popular in the instant for what is a more fundamental principle. So I'm sorry if I went on longer than I usually do, and I certainly did in this debate, but I was allowed time to do that. Thank you, Andrew. The blockade? Well, it's a hypothetical question. I mean, we'll get to, after I become leader, there'll be plenty of time to debate these things. Thank you, Andrew.
We're out of time, so.
We're out of time. Yeah. Thank you very much. Merci.
I'm not actually shocked. Thanks very much. Thanks for everything. Appreciate it, Matt. Good to see you. Yeah, sure.